Meet the Dwayne twins, Allison and Ann. The women were born in Utica, New York. In 1978, they also had an older sister named Amy who was 3 years their senior. When the twin girls were 5 years old, their mother Miriam passed away, leaving them to grow up without maternal love and care. The girls were twins, almost identical in facial features and personalities, but there were differences between them. Allison had a more dominant personality and was a leader, while Ann, unlike her sister, was more reserved, balanced, sweet and kind. Like all twins, the girls did everything together, were inseparable, and sometimes it seemed abnormal how well they could sense each other, as if they had telepathy between them. They could understand what the other needed at any moment, or what the other was about to say before she said it. They were very close and loved each other dearly, but at the same time, there was a kind of toxic, perverse relationship between them, bordering on hatred. Those who knew the twins were amazed at how they could sense each other. If one started to speak, the other could finish her sister's sentences, but throughout their lives, the sisters would fight each other like crazy. Their lives were full of ups and downs, quarrels and terrible fights, then moments of love, and then it would all repeat. Of course, the absence of their mother left an imprint on them, but time passed, the sisters grew up, and in their teens, the girls became interested in yoga, which should have had a beneficial effect on the twins, calming them down and stopping their fights. Indeed, externally, everything seemed quite peaceful. The twins' fascination with yoga led them to the idea of starting their career by opening a joint yoga studio. They found a suitable place around Palm Beach, Florida, invested money, and in 2008 they opened a studio for those who wanted to practice yoga, called Double Power Yoga. This studio opened in 2008, existed for a fairly long period until 2014. The studio immediately became popular. Within 2 months, the yoga school had gained fame in the city, attracting a large number of people who wanted to practice, and the sisters became recognizable personalities, making acquaintances with influential people. The twins' business brought in a good income, and over time the sisters bought identical Porsche cars, which they drove around the city. The girls started living in an elite high-rise building in Palm Beach, dressing in fashionable salons, and continued to spread the idea of practicing yoga, telling everyone how much yoga can help in life. The sisters said that their yoga studio in Palm Beach was the heartbeat of the entire area. The yoga school was thriving, but behind the scenes, where outsiders couldn't see, the relationship between the sisters remained the same as in childhood. They quarreled and fought like teenage girls. As the twins' yoga studio was gaining popularity, they were approached with an offer to star in a reality show that would be about the studio run by twins, as well as about all the dramas in their lives. But for some reason, the release of this project stalled, but the producers, convincing the sisters that the show would definitely be released and that it would be necessary to show the sisters' success, persuaded the girls to rent a more beautiful and spacious premises for yoga classes, and the sisters followed this advice. Despite the fact that the show never materialized, the twins moved to a studio that was more pleasant for them, but the maintenance costs increased and they could no longer fully cover them. Getting a good fee for participating in the show didn't work out for the sisters, and the bills were huge. They gradually began to get into debt, which further aggravated the situation, and in 2014 it was decided to close the studio. The sisters closed the studio in a very peculiar way. They just left. The sisters just abandoned the classes, didn't show up at the studio, didn't pay the employees, didn't return people's money for their participation. And this angered society and turned it against the sisters, because those who came to practice at the studio felt simply robbed. Therefore, the twin sisters left the city and moved to Utah Park City, Utah, and also changed their names, as they planned to write a book in the future, and their names were too well known and frequently appeared on the internet. Because of the failure with the yoga studio, the sisters wanted to start from scratch. Allison changed her name to Alexandria, and Ann became Anastasia. Having settled in a new place, the girls opened another yoga studio, but they no longer had the same success as the first time. Their studio failed, and as a result, the twins found themselves in debt for $150,000 and became bankrupt. At the same time, the relocation, debts, and bankruptcy were accompanied by stress and worries, and the twins began to quarrel more than usual, and to relieve stress, they began to resort to alcohol more often. According to eyewitnesses, while the girls lived in Utah Park City, neighbors repeatedly called the police on them because the sisters drank a lot, loudly argued, and fought. Apparently, the twins were going through very difficult times during this period, were depressed, experiencing depression, and they didn't like living in Utah, so in the end, they packed all their things and went to the most beautiful place on earth, Hawaii. This was in 2015, and interestingly, when the twins said they were going to Hawaii, They added that they were going on a real pilgrimage, ride through holy places, and want to search for the meaning of life. But as soon as the sisters reached their destination, they again faced problems and got into trouble. One time, or rather on Christmas Eve, Alexandria and Anastasia decided to celebrate Christmas in a fun way. As usual, they didn't know when to stop with alcohol. The feast took place in a restaurant where the girls got pretty drunk and, of course, quarreled. Having decided to go home, they, however, did not stop arguing and already near the car began to swear so fiercely that they lost control and drove into a ditch. This happened very close to the restaurant, and the consequences could have been very serious. Fortunately, when the police arrived at the scene, the sisters had already gotten out of the car safe and sound. However, instead of calming down, they continued to swear and even began to insult the restaurant owner. Not understanding what was happening and why they were so angry with him, the sisters, in their drunken frenzy, even threatened him with violence, saying, "We will send the mafia to you. Let them deal with you." Of course, such behavior did not go unnoticed. The police detained the belligerent sisters for hooliganism. As a result, a fine, and it seems a certain sobering up, because after this incident they seemed to calm down a little. Further events showed that pleasant changes also took place in the life of the twins. In 2016, they both found boyfriends and started dating guys. For Alexandria, it was Lonnie Dickerson, and Anastasia started a relationship with Federico Bailey. It would seem that personal life was getting better and the sisters finally found their happiness. But not everything was so cloudless. Once Federico and Anastasia decided to go on a hike, Alexandria was supposed to stay at home. While preparing for the trip and stocking up on groceries at the supermarket, Anastasia accidentally took her sister's credit card instead of her own. Deciding not to use someone else's card, she went back home to get her own. But suddenly Alexandria for some reason changed her mind and decided that she also wanted to join the hike. It is worth noting that Federico, unlike the sisters, perfectly understood the problems associated with alcohol and tried to protect the girls from unnecessary temptation. Therefore, during this trip, he strictly forbade taking any alcoholic beverages with them. But Alexandria, as always, did her own thing. She secretly took a bottle of wine with her and hid it well in the car. When Federico discovered the forbidden alcohol, he was very upset and disappointed. This find caused considerable tension between the participants of the hike. Anastasia, in turn, got angry with her sister for such an irresponsible act. As we can see, even on vacation, in the company of their loved ones, the sisters could not get rid of their old habits and again found themselves in the epicenter of conflict. It would seem that a bottle of wine is a trifle, but it is from such trifles that serious problems often begin. And something tells me that this incident was just the tip of the iceberg. What other surprises did the Dwayne sisters have in store for their companions during this trip? I will note that after that tense scene with the wine, the company, which consisted of sisters Alexandria and Anastasia, as well as Anastasia's boyfriend Federico, finally reached their destination. The campsite where they stopped was located in a surprisingly picturesque area, surrounded by wonderful views of wildlife. While the girls were unpacking their things, Federico decided to freshen up after the long road and went to the nearest spring. However, when he returned to the camp, he was surprised to find that neither the sisters nor their car were anywhere to be seen. It's hard to even imagine what he felt at that moment: confusion, anxiety, perhaps even fear for his companions. As it later turned out, while Federico was away, Alexandria and Anastasia for some reason decided to get in the car and drive down the road that led to Hana. This highway, by the way, is considered one of the most beautiful in the world, but at the same time one of the most dangerous. It winds between the rocks, sometimes resembling a serpentine more than a road. On one side is a solid stone wall, on the other is an abyss that takes your breath away just by looking at it. In addition, the sharp turns on this road often do not allow you to see if someone is approaching from the opposite direction. And if we add to this the fact that the route is not always well maintained and there are potholes, it becomes clear that traveling on it is a real challenge for the driver. But it seems that the Dwayne sisters were little concerned about all these dangers. They boldly, if not carelessly, raced along the winding road, paying no attention to either the beauty around them or the risks that lurked at every turn. And all this because they were preoccupied with another argument. It's hard to even imagine what they could argue about at such a crucial moment, because it's obvious that on this road you need to be as attentive and careful as possible. But despite everything, the sisters managed to notice a lonely woman on the side of the road who obviously needed help. Without much thought, they decided to give her a ride. On the way, they asked the hitchhiker where she was heading, and then dropped her off where she asked. It would seem that this good deed should have slightly diffused the atmosphere between the sisters, but as it turned out, it was quite the opposite. As soon as the unfortunate passenger left the car, a simply terrible quarrel broke out between Alexandria and Anastasia, and it happened in the most dangerous place on one of the sharp turns. Later, one of the eyewitnesses of these events told me that he saw with his own eyes how in the car that was passing by, two girls were furiously waving their arms, punching each other with their fists and pulling each other's hair. The guy was dumbfounded by such a sight because he realized that these actions distracted the driver from driving the car, and on a road like the Rab to Hana out at any moment. But despite the danger of the situation, the eyewitness realized that he could not help in any way. Everything happened so quickly that he wouldn't even have time to react. All he had left was to watch helplessly as the girl at the wheel suddenly accelerated sharply, turned the steering wheel to the left, and the car, breaking off the cliff, flew into the abyss. According to experts, the car fell from a height of about 60 meters and landed right on a pile of sharp stones. The most amazing thing is that it was the only area around the cliff where there was no water. It seems as if some unknown force specifically directed the car to this particular spot. From the strong impact, the car overturned and fell on its roof, so that its license plates were facing the sky. And you know, in this tragic situation, there is one moment that can be called a real miracle. It turns out that the girls were not driving some small car, but a Ford Explorer, a fairly large vehicle. Experts say that if they had been in a smaller car, they would have had practically no chance of surviving. News of the accident spread like wildfire through the surrounding area. The route leading to Hana is quite popular, so people began to gather around the scene of the incident. Everyone looked down in horror at the mangled car lying among the rocks. Someone even called the rescue service by dialing 911. And here the second amazing moment in this story happened. The people who had gathered on the cliff suddenly noticed that someone was moving in the car. It was an almost unbelievable piece of news. It turns out that after such a terrible fall, someone still survived. The police, who arrived at the scene of the accident, immediately began to question numerous witnesses, trying to find out what had happened. And one detail immediately caught their attention. It turns out that on the road surface, there were clearly visible traces of tires from the Dwayne sisters' car. But the strangest thing is that these traces had no signs of braking before the car flew off the cliff. On the contrary, everything indicated that the driver deliberately accelerated and directed the car straight to the edge of the cliff. You must agree that such things do not happen by chance. Meanwhile, rescuers were delivered by helicopter to the scene of the tragedy to check if anyone was left alive in the twisted car. What they saw in the car interior shocked even experienced experts. One of the sisters, Anastasia, was dead. Her body had numerous fractures, and one of the paramedics even compared it to a bag filled with bone fragments. But the real miracle was that the second sister, Alexandria, survived. True, she also had a lot of serious injuries, several broken ribs and a damaged arm. But despite everything, when the girl was pulled out of the wrecked car, she was able to stand on her own feet. And here we come to the most mysterious moment of this story. When the rescuers freed Alexandria from the car, they noticed that she had a lock of blonde hair clenched in her hand, the same color as her dead sister's hair. Most likely, this hair was torn out during the fight that the random eyewitness saw shortly before the accident. But what shocked the investigators the most was Alexandria's behavior. She did not look either frightened or upset about what had just happened. It seemed that the girl was not at all bothered by the fact that she had just miraculously escaped after the car fell from the cliff. And most oddly, she never once asked about her sister's condition, did not ask if Anastasia had survived. Alexandria did not cry, did not sob, did not show her emotions at all. You must agree that such a reaction is on the verge of normal, and it was this that made the investigators wonder. Does this terrible accident hide some terrible secret? Perhaps what happened on the road to Hana was not an accident. After that fatal accident, Alexandria was immediately taken to the hospital. And it was there that she was found by the police, who arrived to conduct an interrogation. From the very beginning, it was clear that the girl was not too willing to cooperate with the investigation. She reluctantly answered questions, and her whole demeanor indicated irritation and dissatisfaction with the presence of the officers. Just imagine the first thing she said to them was, "Why are you here?" You know, during my many years as a detective, I've interrogated a lot of witnesses and suspects, and usually people who have just experienced such a terrible tragedy behave differently. They may be shocked, scared, upset, but indifference is the last thing you expect in such a situation. And another detail that surprised me a lot during the entire conversation with the police officers, Alexandria never once asked about her sister's condition. No worries, no anxiety, absolutely nothing. In the end, the investigators had to inform the girl about Anastasia's death themselves. And you know what struck me the most? The complete absence of any reaction from Alexandria. She listened to this terrible news with a completely empty, indifferent look without a hint of emotion. You must agree that this is more like the behavior of a person who has long come to terms with the loss, and not one who has just lost the closest person in an instant. But Alexandria's strange reaction is not the biggest surprise in this story. When the twins' father found out about the tragedy, his first words were, "It's a pity that the wrong sister died." That's right, you didn't mishear. The man actually regretted that Anastasia died in the accident and not Alexandria. Such an attitude towards one's own children is, to put it mildly, alarming. Meanwhile, the police continued the investigation and quickly found out that the sisters were fighting right in the car before the accident. This information made the investigators wonder, was the car's fall from the cliff actually Alexandria's deliberate act? Maybe she purposely directed the car towards the abyss to get rid of her sister. Even more suspicions were aroused by the results of the tests, which showed that the level of alcohol in Alexandria's blood was 3 times higher than the permissible norm. That is, the girl was actually heavily drunk behind the wheel and had no right to drive at all, let alone go on such a dangerous trip. The situation was complicated by the fact that at the time of the accident, the girls had no documents with them. It was because of this that the police had to rely on Alexandria's words to establish the identity of the deceased. And the girl, meanwhile, was forced to go home to find her ID and prove that she was indeed herself. The investigators also turned to Lonnie Dickerson, Alexandria's boyfriend, with a request to confirm her identity. When Lonnie was told about the accident and Anastasia's death, his reaction was no less strange than Alexandria's. It seemed that this news did not touch him at all. He just looked at the police officers with an empty, indifferent look. But Federico, Anastasia's boyfriend, was completely unaware of the tragedy. He was still waiting for the girls at the campsite, not understanding where they could have gone. Only the next morning, having got to his friend's place in Hana by hitchhiking, Federico learned the terrible truth. The news of his beloved's death was a real shock for him. The guy was extremely upset and confused, but suddenly remembered something. And believe me, this information greatly interested the investigation. Undoubtedly, the information provided by Federico was a real sensation for the investigation. He said that a week before the tragedy, Alexandria openly stated her intention to kill Anastasia. Moreover, at one point she even said, "I got rid of her," as if the murder had already happened. Such words could not but cause serious concern. True, Federico could not say for sure the reason why Alexandria wished death to her sister. But he suggested that there was a very strong rivalry and mutual jealousy between the girls because of each other's successes. It was hard for the twins to come to terms with the fact that they were so similar in appearance, and this forced them to constantly compete and oppose each other. Federico said that the sisters were constantly trying to outdo each other to prove their uniqueness. It was as if they wanted to tell the world, "Look, we may look like 2 peas in a pod, but we are different personalities." But despite this, the girls could not stay away from each other for long. Their relationship was a strange combination of love and hate, tenderness and aggression. When they were together, they constantly quarreled and insulted each other, but as soon as they were apart, they already missed their other half. But the strangest thing is that Federico recalled that once, after another heated argument, Alexandria told him, as if in passing, "My sister and I will leave this planet on the 30th. When the guy heard this, he thought that maybe the girls had decided to commit suicide together. But life went on as usual, and gradually this phrase was erased from Federico's memory. Upon hearing such a confession, the investigators became seriously alarmed. A terrible picture began to emerge in their heads. Alexandria deliberately drove the car into the abyss to kill her sister. Of course, one could assume otherwise, for example, that the girls decided to settle scores with life together, or that it was just a tragic coincidence, an accident. But something told the detectives that the answer lay precisely in Alexandria's words, which Federico heard. So the investigators decided to take a closer look at the Dwayne sisters' car. Fortunately, it was a new, modern car with many technical gadgets, and most importantly, it had a black box like in airplanes. This device records all information about the movement of the car, speed, maneuvers, change of direction, and so on. Thanks to the data from the black box, it was possible to find out an extremely important detail. At the moment the car fell, the brakes were not used. That is, the car was flying off the cliff at full speed. No one even tried to stop, or at least slow down. For the investigators, this was direct evidence that the accident was not an accident. Suspicions were intensified by the fact that the car fell into the abyss exactly where there were only sharp stones at the bottom and not water. It seemed as if someone had specifically chosen this spot for the fall. Moreover, it was here, on this stretch of road, that for some reason there was no protective fence. Everything seemed to come together for the implementation of someone's sinister plan. Experts made another interesting conclusion: Alexandria survived thanks to the deployment of airbags. But Anastasia was not so lucky. She jumped and bumped a lot in the cabin during the fall. Someone even suggested that if at the time of the accident the girl was pulling her sister by the hair, then Alexandria could quite possibly involuntarily turn the steering wheel and press the gas. Having received such testimony and evidence, the investigators decided to bring an official charge against Alexandria. There was only one question left: what motive pushed the girl to such a terrible act? It turns out that shortly before the tragedy, Federico and Anastasia were planning to open their own business on another Hawaiian island. And here we come to a possible motive for the crime. According to the testimony, Alexandria was extremely dissatisfied with the fact that her sister was going to leave her. The girl was so strongly opposed to parting with her twin that she may have decided to resort to the most radical measures. Having gathered all the circumstantial evidence, the investigation was finally able to bring an official charge against Alexandria, the intentional murder of her sister, that is, a second-degree crime. But when the police arrived to arrest the suspect, it turned out that she had already fled the house. It seems that the girl somehow guessed about the possible arrest and decided to hide from justice. But Alexandria apparently forgot about one simple thing: Maui is an island, and you can only leave it in two ways, by sea or by air. So it wasn't too difficult for the police to find out that the girl had booked a plane ticket and that her flight was about to depart. And you know, sometimes fate can be surprisingly ironic. By some coincidence, it was on this plane that a mechanical malfunction occurred and the departure had to be postponed. So instead of being hundreds of kilometers away from the crime scene, Alexandria was forced to stay very close, but she went to wait it out in a nearby hotel. And there she was eventually found and arrested by the police. During the preliminary hearing of the case, Alexandria did not plead guilty to the murder of her sister. And here I would like to draw your attention to one detail. In the footage from the courtroom, you can see that the suspect's hand was not bandaged, although she had previously complained about an injury. Some of those present even suggested that Alexandria could have exaggerated the severity of her injury in order to arouse sympathy from others. The day of the substantive trial came. A large jury gathered on Maui, and Alexandria was officially charged with killing her sister. For this, the girl was taken to Hawaii to personally face justice. The process began on January 29, 2018. At first, Alexandria looked very excited and scared. No wonder, after all, she was facing life imprisonment. One of the key witnesses in this case was the same random passerby who saw with his own eyes how the sisters were fiercely fighting in the car shortly before the accident. The man described in detail what he saw: how Anastasia pulled her sister by the hair, pulled her head to herself, and punched her with her fists. This testimony formed the basis of the defense's version, according to which Alexandria, being behind the wheel, could have lost control of the car from pain and shock. Allegedly not seeing the road clearly due to her sister's attack, the girl could have unintentionally directed the car into the abyss. Then Federico, the deceased Anastasia's boyfriend, was questioned on the witness stand. He spoke about Alexandria's strange and disturbing behavior after the tragedy. According to him, the girl tried to establish closer contact with him, suggested taking a shower together, began to wear her sister's things. Federico admitted that he was shocked and repelled by such actions. Despite the outward resemblance to his beloved, he categorically refused to get close to Alexandria. But despite all this testimony, the suspect's lawyers insisted that it was Anastasia who caused the fatal accident. Allegedly, by attacking her sister, she provoked her to rash actions. The defense also referred to the results of the examination, according to which the car's wheel was changed shortly before the accident, so one of the tires was completely smooth. Given that the road was wet that day, and the sister's car was initially swaying due to the fight inside the cabin, it could well have happened that Alexandria simply could not cope with driving on the slippery road. So the court faced a difficult question. What really happened that fatal day on the road to Hana? Was the accident really an accident caused by a combination of factors, or was there a malicious intent behind it? And most importantly, is Alexandria guilty of her sister's death? The answer to these questions was to be given by the jury. So after hearing all the available evidence, the judge reached a conclusion and announced his decision. According to it, Alexandria was not responsible for the accident and the death of her sister, and therefore she was immediately acquitted. In the judge's opinion, the accused lost control of the vehicle, and perhaps she did indeed turn on the left turn signal. But even if she did, the evidence shows that the car was being heavily shaken from side to side due to the fight inside the cabin. The judge noted that the mere probability that Alexandria could have driven the car into the abyss is not sufficient for a guilty verdict. This requires strong and indisputable evidence of intent, and in this case they were absent. Instead, eyewitness accounts and expert findings rather indicated that the accident was the result of a fatal coincidence of circumstances: bad weather conditions, a slippery road, lack of fencing in a dangerous area, and most importantly, a merciless fight between the sisters that distracted the driver from driving. As a detective, this court decision seems rather controversial to me. Is it possible to exclude intent in a situation where one sister openly threatened to kill the other? Can it be considered an accident that the crash occurred in the very place where there were only sharp rocks below? After all, isn't it strange that Alexandria, despite the death of her twin, behaved as if nothing special had happened? These questions will probably never have unambiguous answers. Opinions on Alexandria's guilt were divided. Some consider her a completely innocent victim of a tragic coincidence. For others, she remains the main suspect who managed to escape punishment by cunning. Alexandria herself insists on her non-involvement in what happened. According to her, she misses Anastasia very much and is deeply saddened by everything that happened. But whether she can be believed is another question.
On March 7, 2019, something horrific and mysterious happened in the Nevada desert. A local man driving through the desolate area noticed an abandoned car and immediately called the police. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they saw that the car's windows and doors were smashed, as if someone had tried to escape from the inside. At first, it seemed that no one was inside, but they were alerted by the smell of decay coming from the trunk. Upon opening it, they discovered the body of a 71-year-old psychiatrist from California, Tom Burchard. Tom was a well-known and respected person who had dedicated his entire life to helping others. His patients adored him for his kindness and compassion, and his colleagues respected him for his professionalism. Unfortunately, Tom had no children of his own, although he was married. Perhaps that's why he immersed himself in work with troubled children and teenagers, trying to fill the void in his heart. In addition to psychiatry, Tom had another passion: magic. He was a member of the exclusive magicians club, the Magic Castle, and often entertained his young patients with tricks. He especially enjoyed turning a $1 bill into a $100 bill. This trick invariably caused delight and joy in children. If Tom found out that one of his patients' parents was having financial difficulties, he would give them this magic bill without hesitation. Thanks to his generosity and kindness, Tom became a true light in the lives of many disadvantaged children and their families. How did he end up in the trunk in the middle of the desert, hundreds of miles from home? I'll tell you all the details right now. Burchard's patients were many women who found themselves in difficult life circumstances. Single mothers suffering from drug addiction or forced to sell their bodies to feed their children. Tom sincerely cared about their fates and often offered financial assistance, even though it might have seemed unethical from the point of view of his profession. But one day in December 2000, when Tom was 52, his own life turned upside down. How, of course, upside down because he was Trump's psychologist. Sorry, a bad joke. His wife found out that he was secretly communicating with young girls on the internet, meeting with them and giving them money. She immediately filed for divorce, suspecting her husband of infidelity and sexual relations with his patients. Tom denied any illegal actions and insisted that he was guided solely by the desire to help women in need. However, his reputation was tarnished, and his motives were incomprehensible to those around him. It seemed that at this point, Dr. Burchard's personal life had finally collapsed. But during a vacation in Las Vegas in 22, he met Judy, a 42-year-old divorced mother of 4. Despite the age difference, they quickly found common ground. Both did not drink alcohol, spent time by the pool, went to concerts, and even promised each other to meet again. Soon, Judy moved in with Tom in the small town of Salinas. They lived together in a cozy country house, and it seemed that the doctor had finally found his happiness. Judy's children became a real family for him, which he had never had. In 2017, Dr. Burchard's wife took another unexpected turn. Through the internet, he met 24-year-old Kelsey Turner, a young and ambitious girl with a difficult fate. Kelsey was born on May 5, 1993 in Norfolk, Virginia. At the age of 22, she decided to radically change her life and moved to sunny California with the dream of becoming a successful model. On social media, the girl created the image of a bad Barbie, a sexy and daring beauty who is not afraid to break the rules. It seemed that fate itself smiled upon Kelsey. She began posing for such famous men's magazines as Playboy and Maxim. Once, some of her photos from those days fell into my hands. I must admit, the girl was really stunning. A slender figure, lush white curls, a magnetic gaze. Men love such women. But as is often the case, a completely different reality was hidden behind the glossy cover. It turned out that despite her popularity on the internet and Kelsey had over 100,000 subscribers, her modeling career never took off, and she already had 2 children from different men, a boy and a girl. The first pregnancy occurred when Kelsey was only 17, but the boy who was the child's father quickly disappeared from her life immediately after the birth of her daughter. In 2014, Turner made another attempt to establish her personal life. She got married and gave birth to a son. But this marriage also broke up very quickly, leaving Kelsey a single mother with 2 children in her arms and a lot of debts. And so yesterday she was a star of the network, and today she is a destitute, homeless woman who barely makes ends meet. It was probably at this moment of despair that she met Dr. Burchett. Having learned about Kelsey's difficult circumstances, Thomas offered to rent an apartment for her and the children for $3,000 a month.
He not only paid the deposit, but also paid for housing for a whole year and gave money for daily expenses. And all this was from his own pocket, without demanding anything in return. Of course, such a gesture can be assessed in different ways. Some will see it as a manifestation of sincere mercy, others as another proof of the doctor's strange inclinations in relations with young women. But from the point of view of the investigation, the fact itself is important. A 71-year-old respected psychiatrist suddenly decided to sponsor the life of a failed model and her 2 children. Why? And wasn't it part of some kind of intricate manipulation on Kelsey's part? As it turned out later, Kelsey was far from the only young woman patronized by 71-year-old Dr. Burchett. There were a good dozen of them, and they all gladly took advantage of the generosity of the elderly psychiatrist. But it seems that even among them, Kelsey stood out with her special appetites. No one else demanded such exorbitant sums from Tom. Judy, of course, knew about her husband's charitable impulses, and he himself did not hide it. However, Tom's relationship with Kelsey was becoming increasingly tense. Despite the crazy money he gave her supposedly for the maintenance of children, the girl's appetites grew incessantly. On social networks, she flaunted photos from noisy parties in the company of friends and did not even think about changing her lifestyle. Judy finally came to her senses. Kelsey was shamelessly exploiting Tom's kindness, manipulating his feelings. She begged her husband to stop sponsoring the girl, but he had already managed to throw $300,000 down the drain. Every week, Kelsey received money from him for renting a home, refueling a car, and her own whims. And all these expenses instantly turned into drinking and partying. Even a saint would lose patience here. But for some reason, Tom also needed pressure from Judy to finally come to his senses and stop paying for Kelsey's dissolute life. He warned the landlord that he would give the money only for the next 3 months, and then let the girl manage on her own. Of course, Kelsey did not like this. She suddenly lost her main breadwinner. Her fury fell not only on Tom, but also on that bitch Judy, who, oh horror, dared to open her husband's eyes. In messages, the girl promised to kill her rival and included her in the blacklist. Feeling that Tom was moving away, Kelsey resorted to outright blackmail. She threatened to call the police and say that he was a pedophile, thereby ruining his career and reputation. A person frightened by scandal is easy prey for manipulators. Tom was afraid of gossip and condemnation, but luckily Judy was there to support him in the difficult moment. I must admit that even I, a seasoned cop, got the creeps from this story. It's hard to believe that a young girl can be so insidious and merciless, and all for the sake of easy money. After Thomas stopped paying the rent for Kelsey's apartment, she was evicted in November 2018. It would seem that their relationship should have ended there, but not at all. The girl continued to terrorize the elderly doctor with threats, and in the end, he agreed to give her money for the last time just to get rid of her forever. Kelsey told Tom a sad story that social services had taken away her daughter, and now she wants to leave the city. In December 2018, she moved to Las Vegas, Nevada. At that time, Thomas decided to stop all communication with her. But Kelsey herself did not waste time. Barely arriving in Vegas, she met some Greg, and right after Christmas, they started living together. However, the relationship of this couple was, to put it mildly, turbulent. The police visited their home several times because of domestic violence, and Greg was even arrested. But Kelsey did not grieve alone for long. Already in February 2019, she found herself a new boyfriend, John Logan Kenninson, an extremely dubious personality. He had just been released from prison, where he was serving a sentence for drug distribution, and immediately occupied Kelsey's home. And then Dr. Burchett, who was in Vegas at a medical conference at the time, behaved extremely strangely. Despite all of Kelsey's previous threats, he met with her. Excuse me, I can't help but add, but don't all Trump supporters always want to go back to the way things used to be? A coincidence? I don't think so. It seems that the elderly man simply could not erase the girl from his life. Upon returning to California, he began to help her again, this time with money. And all because Kelsey wrote to him that her new roommate was beating her and begged for help for herself and her son. Thomas, of course, became seriously alarmed. But he decided not to tell Judy the truth. He lied that he was going to some magic show. On March 1, 2019, he flew to Las Vegas to see with his own eyes what was happening to Kelsey. It turned out that the girl lives in the house not only with her son and a sadist roommate. They also had a tenant, a certain Diana Pena, a 30-year-old waitress. She lived for free in exchange for babysitting Kelsey's son. In addition to this strange company, a not-quite-sewn-on guy named Jeremy also lived in the house. He occupied a room on the first floor. And so Kelsey introduces Dr. Burchard to all these people, supposedly her good acquaintance, almost a benefactor who is in love with her. Of course, such an explanation caused surprise and bewilderment among the roommates. But Kelsey herself vehemently denied any romantic connection. They say the man is just incredibly generous. That's why he helps. And it seemed that everything was fine. But on the very first night of Thomas's stay in the house, an unfortunate surprise happened. Jeremy's girlfriend appeared on the doorstep, blonde, drunk, and obviously not averse to flirting with a wealthy guest. And he, why sin to conceal, was partial to young beauties. Kelsey terribly disliked this. Apparently, she was afraid that a random rival would take away her sponsor. And without an influx of fresh dollars, Kelsey's usual way of life with drinking and partying was under threat. That evening, Thomas and Jeremy's girlfriend decided to go to the store. Dr. Burchard got behind the wheel as he did not drink alcohol. But Kelsey, consumed by jealousy, began to accuse her companion of deliberately creating discord in her relationship with Thomas. Jeremy seemed to feel the growing tension. Upon returning home, he hastily packed his things and left the house with his girlfriend, apparently so as not to aggravate the situation. Meanwhile, Thomas sent Judy a message. He explained that he came to Kelsey to clarify the situation and find out the truth. He promised to stay for the weekend and return home on March 4th. Judy was seriously worried about her husband. She knew better than anyone what Kelsey was capable of in her cruelty and manipulations. And Thomas, honest and trusting, would hardly be able to stand up for himself. She desperately begged him to return and never meet Kelsey again. After all, that girl, in Judy's opinion, was a dangerous person in an extremely unstable state. But all persuasion was in vain. Thomas did not listen to his wife. And as it turned out, that message was the last one Judy received from her beloved husband. After that, Thomas stopped communicating, and his phone was turned off altogether. Alarming premonitions did not leave Judy. She knew that her husband was suffering from early dementia, which made the situation even more dramatic. Sometimes Thomas could not find his car in the parking lot or lost things, and sometimes he even forgot the way home or did not recognize Judy's daughter. In addition, Dr. Burchard had a significant amount of cash with him, about $1,000, and also a diary where he wrote down everything he forgot, including passwords. Judy was afraid that her husband could be robbed or that he simply got lost in a strange city. She contacted the police 3 times, sharing her fears and suspicions. She told law enforcement officers that Thomas had gone to Kelsey and even gave them the girl's address. She noted that she had already demonstrated her cruelty more than once and was unlikely to stop using the generosity of her trusting husband. Judy was convinced that something had happened to Tom after all. He did not return when he promised. The police visited Kelsey's house several times, but to no avail. There was no one there. Only during the last visit, they noticed some strange details. The lights were on in the windows, the blinds were open, and the mailbox was completely stuffed with letters. The front door was unlocked. Going inside, the cops found no one. Only the pungent smell of cleaning products wafting through the air seemed extremely suspicious to them. Deciding not to touch potential evidence, law enforcement officers left the house. Having contacted the owner of the dwelling, the police found out little. The man only confirmed the fact that someone had paid for 3 months' rent in advance, and that neither Kelsey nor Thomas were at home. Well, in light of these circumstances, the cops simply had no other choice. They obtained a search warrant for Kelsey's home, hoping to find at least some clues in this confusing story. On the morning of March 7, 2019 at 10:50 a.m., an event occurred that became a turning point in this tangled story. Some men with children were driving along a deserted road in the Nevada desert. Suddenly, they noticed a Mercedes parked in a strange place. But it was not this that caught their attention, but the broken window of the car. Without hesitation, the concerned citizens called the police. When the patrol arrived at the scene, the cops thoroughly examined the vehicle. The windows and doors were damaged as if someone had forcibly tried to get out from the inside. After starting the engine and opening the trunk, the police saw some items. But what alarmed them the most was the smell of decay emanating from there. Under the blanket lay a mutilated male body with signs of brutal violence. In my years, I've seen plenty of horrific scenes at crime scenes, but what they did to this poor soul shocked even me, a seasoned cop. The forensic experts who arrived soon began to carefully study the car. Inside, latex gloves and cleaning supplies were found. Someone was clearly trying to remove evidence. Blood traces were also found on the driver's seat, although it was not easy to establish what exactly happened there. However, the overall picture was quite obvious. It seemed that the victim was attacked right in the car, and then, barely alive or already dead, was shoved into the trunk. The examination showed that the poor man was beaten to death, having received numerous blows to the head with a blunt object. In addition, numerous bruises, cuts, and scratches were found on the body. A particularly eerie detail was the missing part of the ear. Judging by the wounds on his hands, the man had desperately tried to defend himself. But in vain, a series of powerful blows to the head left him no chance. The first thing the police found out was the name of the car owner. It turned out to be none other than Kelsey Turner. The cops immediately linked the disappearance of Dr. Burchard with the found mutilated body. Having obtained a warrant, the investigators visited Kelsey's home with a search. Already on the spot, they found telling evidence. A bloody towel, identical to the one lying in the trunk of a Mercedes, traces of blood on broken doors, and most interestingly, cleaning supplies. It seemed as if someone had desperately tried to wipe the bloody stains off the floor. On March 15, the police finally received permission to arrest the main suspect. 2 weeks later, Kelsey Turner, who was hiding with her son in California at the time, was detained by FBI agents. The boy was sent to the care of a foster family, and the negligent mother was officially charged with murder. Her last roommate, John, was also taken into custody. It seemed that everything was clear, only the details remained. However, a real breakthrough in the investigation was the testimony of Diana, a neighbor and an involuntary participant in those terrible events. The woman herself came to the police along with her lawyer. In exchange for a mitigation of punishment, she told the investigators in detail everything that actually happened that fateful evening. I must admit, after hearing her testimony, even I, an old detective, was stunned by the ruthlessness and cold-bloodedness of the criminals. The second day of Dr. Burchard's visit to Kelsey in Vegas turned out to be fatal. Diana, as usual, was working at a local bar. Thomas and Kelsey came to pick her up after her shift. The doctor was driving, but he obviously had a poor sense of direction in the city and quickly got lost. Losing patience, Kelsey snatched his phone under the pretext of searching for a route. But having the device in her hands, she couldn't resist and began rummaging through Tom's messenger. And here she made an extremely unpleasant discovery. Among the messages were nude photos of her own mother, Samantha. Digging further, Kelsey found out shocking details. It turned out that her mother was also begging for money from the elderly psychiatrist. She must have touched him with some moving story from her difficult life, and the kind-hearted doctor, of course, fell for it. Upon learning about this, Kelsey went mad with rage. A barrage of insults and reproaches fell upon Thomas. The poor man was confused and did not know how to react to her frenzied attack. By some miracle, he still managed to get the car to the house without getting into an accident. But the adventures did not end there. At home, Kelsey continued to yell at Tom, calling him names. She threatened to expose his connection with her mother and ruin his reputation. To somehow hide from this verbal pressure, Thomas locked himself in her son's room. Fortunately, the boy was not at home that evening. He was staying overnight at a friend's place. However, Kelsey did not calm down. Now she was already demanding that Thomas pay a huge sum for her silence. The doctor could not stand it and slammed the door in anger. This sound infuriated John, who had been silently watching everything that was happening. Grabbing a baseball bat, he smashed the door of the room with a swing. Diana saw John rushing down the corridor like a mad beast. Then there was a dull thud, and a moment later she saw Thomas's body lying on the floor. A huge bruise was already swelling on his head. Puzzled by their own deed, John and Kelsey instantly fled, leaving the unconscious doctor to his fate. Diana rushed to help the poor man. She gave him water, tried to somehow bring him to his senses. Thomas barely realized what had happened. He was in deep shock. Diana understood that the man needed immediate medical attention. She wanted to take him to the hospital, but unfortunately, she did not know how to drive a car. Thomas was also unable to get behind the wheel. We had to wait for Kelsey and John. There was simply no one else to count on. But the couple was in no hurry to rescue their victim. On the contrary, the exhausted Thomas whispered a terrible thing to Diana. Most likely, these two were planning to kill him. A moment later, Kelsey returned. Cynically stating that she would take Tom to the hospital, she began hastily wiping away all traces of the attack. The frightened Diana rushed to wash the bloodied floor. At the same time, she heard Thomas desperately arguing with his tormentors in the garage. And then, through the noise, Kelsey's cold order to John reached her. "Hit him again." The girl rushed downstairs to stop the beast of a roommate. But alas, she did not make it in time. An innocent person was being brutally finished off right before her eyes, and no one was going to save the victim. Diana was in complete shock from what she saw. She froze in place, not knowing what to do next. Tears streamed down her face, but Kelsey did not give the girl even a minute to despair. Coldly ordering the subordinate to go back upstairs and erase the last traces of the crime, she herself began to carry the bloody body out of the house. Meanwhile, the police, called by one of the neighbors, were already banging on the door. Diana had every chance to stop this madness. It was enough just to open the door and tell the cops the truth. But the girl did not dare. She panicked and barricaded herself inside, hoping to wait out the danger. The next day, Kelsey took Thomas's mutilated body to the desert and left it in the trunk of his own car. Perhaps she hoped that in such a deserted place, exposure could be avoided, but she miscalculated. On March 21, Kelsey and her roommate John were finally arrested on suspicion of murder. The obstinate couple denied their involvement to the last, blaming each other. And here Diana's testimony played a key role. Thanks to a plea deal with the investigation, the girl was released on bail. Already in court, she fearlessly pointed to Kelsey and John as the direct killers of Thomas. The defenders of the defendants, of course, tried to tarnish the witness and downplay the significance of her testimony, but in vain. During the hearings, Kelsey always appeared in loose prison clothes, and no wonder she was in the last months of pregnancy with another, already third child. Who was the father of this baby remained a mystery. In the end, John surrendered first. He confessed to second-degree murder, admitting his part in the conspiracy. The court sentenced him to 45 years behind bars. Kelsey held out to the last, pretending to be an innocent victim of circumstances. Her own trial was scheduled for November 2022, but a moment before the start of the hearing, the woman suddenly changed her testimony. She also admitted guilt in second-degree murder. The sentence is 25 years in prison. Already in the cell, Kelsey gave birth to a daughter who was instantly transferred to the guardianship authorities. It seems that the child was lucky she will not see her insidious mother until she becomes an adult, and let that one rot behind bars. The investigation established that Kelsey was a clever swindler and a pathological liar. She cynically used the kind-hearted Thomas for money, and when she realized that the elderly doctor would no longer be her source of income, she decided to get rid of him. Kelsey's accusations of pedophilia against Dr. Burchard turned out to be completely unfounded. The police thoroughly examined the contents of his phone and other electronic devices, but did not find any evidence to support these horrific allegations. Yes, there were photos of naked women in his mobile phone's memory, but there were no images of children or minors among them. The investigators also unearthed the fact of intimate correspondence between Thomas and Kelsey with quite explicit photos. But since both were adults, these materials were considered inappropriate to be presented in court as evidence of the doctor's guilt. It is difficult to unequivocally assess the actions of Dr. Burchard. On the one hand, his relationships with young women and obsession with charity seem strange, to say the least, especially for a respectable man well over 70. But despite everything, Thomas was a kind, sensitive person who sincerely sought to help those in need, and his professional merits and good reputation are undeniable. Until the very end, his wife Judy tried to protect the trusting Thomas from Kelsey's insidious encroachments. She repeatedly begged her husband to sever all ties with this girl. She felt that she was manipulating and using the elderly doctor for her own selfish purposes. Unfortunately, the man in love completely lost his mind and did not listen to her wise advice. And now I would like to draw your attention to another tragic aspect of this eerie story. To the fate of Kelsey's unfortunate children, a boy and two girls, whom she gave birth to from different men. Babies who were unlucky enough to be born to this irresponsible and cynical woman. She always put her own desires and whims above the needs and well-being of her offspring.
Thanks to Diana's testimony, it became known that Kelsey used children as a lever of influence on others. She asked for money allegedly for their maintenance, but she spent it on entertainment and drugs. She led a dissolute life, dragging the kids through dubious rented apartments and dens. Are these normal conditions for the growth and development of children? It's strange that social services did not take them away earlier. I'm afraid to imagine what traumas such upbringing will turn into for these kids. After all, they never had a chance to experience maternal warmth and genuine care. Their short life is continuous poverty, instability, and arbitrariness of an insidious mother. And the worst thing is that Kelsey's care was cut short in the most insidious way through the brutal murder of a person. Not the best example to follow. You know, such high-profile cases always make you wonder what is going on in the heads of such Kelseys. What pushes these young women to embark on a bloody path and drag the innocent with them? One thing I can say for sure, at the heart of their actions lies vile selfishness and the inability to take responsibility for their lives. They are not ready to be mothers, but they give birth to children. They do not want to work, but they strive for luxury and wealth. They manipulate, lie, and parasitize on the kindness of others. And when the victim shows character, they get rid of them at any cost. Thinking about Kelsey Turner, I can't get rid of the feeling of bitterness and disappointment. This woman is a prime example of what a mother should not be. She completely forgot about her most important duty to take care of the well-being and safety of her own children. Instead of creating a stable and loving environment for them, Kelsey turned the lives of her offspring into complete chaos. She dragged them through various boyfriends and dubious dwellings, while she herself was drinking and using drugs at this time. The kids lived in an atmosphere of constant fear, neglect, and deprivation. But even this did not prompt the negligent mother to come to her senses and change her behavior. She continued to make irresponsible decisions, obeying only her own impulsive desires. And she used the children as a lever for pressure and manipulation of others, including Dr. Burchett. Tragically, in the end, even Judy could not protect the poor kids from the devastating influence of their mother. Social services also lacked the determination to take them out of the toxic environment. One can only imagine what traumas and complexes such upbringing inflicted on them for life. In this bloody drama, Dr. Thomas Burchett found himself a hostage to his own good intentions. Despite some controversial traits of his personality, he was a kind and sensitive person who sincerely sought to help those in need. He did not deserve such a cruel and untimely death at the hands of an insidious fraudster whom he unreservedly trusted. This case has become a chilling confirmation of the old truth. Sometimes excessive kindness, generosity, and trust turn against the benefactor himself. Not everyone who reaches out for help is guided by pure thoughts. Some, like Kelsey, only need money and the opportunity to parasitize on other people's resources.
Of course, it's easy to judge the victim from the height of lived years and one's own experience, like it was necessary to think with your head, not your heart. Do not succumb to the manipulation and threats of a scammer. But Thomas, it seems, simply could not do otherwise. His humanity, sincerity, and compassion for the disadvantaged became both his greatest virtue and his fatal mistake. Now we can only hope that Kelsey's orphan children will find comfort in a new loving family, that some kind people will take them under their wing and give them the peace, comfort, and care that these babies have been deprived of since birth. Perhaps this will somewhat compensate them for the traumatic past and help them grow into worthy individuals. As for Dr. Thomas Burchett, he will undoubtedly remain forever in the memory of those he managed to help during his lifetime. His bright soul, selflessness, and desire to give good will definitely not be forgotten. And although these amazing qualities eventually ruined Thomas, they also turned him into a real guardian angel for many unfortunate and disadvantaged people. They say that true kindness does not need gratitude or recognition. It does not expect anything in return, but simply does the right thing at the call of the heart. Probably this is exactly what our deceased doctor was, a generous soul in a soulless world of human cruelty and self-interest. And although his earthly path ended too early and tragically, I want to believe that there, in the afterlife, Thomas finally found the peace and love that he sometimes lacked during his lifetime. And we, the cops, will just do our job. We will punish the guilty so that the death of this bright man is not in vain. It's hard to put an end to such high-profile cases, because despite the arrests and trials, some bitter injustice remains, as if evil once again prevailed, and we again could not prevent a bloody denouement. But despite everything, I believe that every good deed, every rescue, and every punished abomination makes this world at least a little better and safer. And even if we are not given to eradicate all the evil, at least we do not allow it to prevail completely. The story of Dr. Burchett will become another sad, but important brick in the wall of human memory. A warning for some and an inspiration for others. A reminder that evil is always near, but good does not disappear either. The main thing is not to lose humanity and compassion, even in the face of the most terrible trials. This is Travis, a young man born on July 28, 1977 in sunny California, was a sales department employee. His parents were Hora Divid and Lisa Butt Morgan, an ordinary American family. One September day in 26, fate brought Travis together with an aspiring photographer, a 26-year-old blonde named Jodi Arias. It happened at a professional conference in vibrant Las Vegas, dedicated to prepaid and legal services, where Travis was representing his company. Jodi Arias, despite her young age, was already actively seeking opportunities to collaborate with a company where Travis worked. Their acquaintance happened spontaneously, but from the first minutes, there was an incredible chemistry between them. They communicated perfectly, as if they had known each other all their lives, and seemed to have a lot in common. Wanting to continue their communication in a more private setting, Travis invited Jodi to his company's official dinner as his personal guest. It was there, amidst business conversations and glasses of wine, that a spark ignited between them, which later grew into a passionate romance. Jodi was enchanted by Travis's sense of humor, ease, and cheerful disposition. Next to him, she felt comfortable and carefree, forgetting about all her troubles. Their meetings became regular, filled with laughter, passion, and dreams of a shared future. As an experienced detective, I would note that often it is precisely such seemingly perfect acquaintances that can lead to unpredictable and even tragic consequences. Behind the mask of attractiveness and friendliness, dark secrets and dangerous intentions can hide. However, at that moment, nothing foreshadowed trouble. The lovers enjoyed each other's company, making plans for the future and not suspecting what a dramatic turn their relationship would take. From the outside, it seemed that Travis and Jodi were a perfect couple, created by fate itself. They complemented each other, shared common interests and dreams. However, as practice shows, often behind the ideal facade, deep cracks hide that can destroy even the strongest relationships. And this case was no exception. After that fateful acquaintance at the conference, Jodi decided to end her relationship with her then-boyfriend and dive headfirst into a romance with Travis. However, distance stood in the way of their happiness. The lovers lived in different states. Travis lived in another region, while Jodi remained in Palm Desert, California. But this did not become an obstacle to their feelings, and they continued to keep in touch despite the geographical remoteness. According to one of Travis' friends, Jodi made the impression of a very attractive and friendly girl. Her long blonde hair and slender figure could not leave any man indifferent. During a joint dinner with Travis, they constantly talked about something, and from the outside, it seemed that a genuine mutual affection had arisen between them. Travis and Jodi's relationship developed rapidly, despite the distance. They constantly communicated by phone, exchanged messages, and tried to see each other in person as often as possible. It seemed that nothing could overshadow their happiness. However, I would note that not all of Travis' friends shared his admiration for the new girl. Some of them, who had the chance to get to know Jodi better and observe the development of their relationship, felt a certain uneasiness. Perhaps it was some kind of sixth sense that hinted that something disturbing was hiding behind Jodi's attractive appearance and sweet smile. But lovers rarely listen to the advice of friends, especially when it comes to matters of the heart. Travis was so enchanted by Jodi that he did not pay attention to the warnings of those around him. He was convinced that he had found his true love and was ready to fight for this relationship no matter what. As practice shows, often at the beginning of a romance, during the so-called rose-colored glasses period, lovers do not notice obvious alarming signs in the behavior of their other half. They idealize their partner, attributing desired qualities to them and ignoring potential flaws. And only with time, when the euphoria subsides and the relationship reaches a new level, true faces and intentions begin to reveal themselves. But despite all the warnings, Travis and Jodi continued to enjoy their romance. They made plans for the future, dreamed of a life together, and were ready to overcome any obstacles on the way to their happiness. However, as time will tell, sometimes the greatest danger lurks from those we love the most. And right now, the crack in the relationship that I will tell you about will happen. The more people hear this story, the more people can draw conclusions for themselves and protect themselves from similar circumstances. This is very important. Despite the passionate feelings and plans for a shared future, after 5 months, Jodi and Travis' relationship reached a dead end. They decided to break up, but as often happens in such cases, they could not completely sever the connection. The former lovers continued to maintain physical intimacy and communicate as if nothing had changed. At first, it seemed that such a format of the relationship suited them perfectly. They remained a part of each other's lives, but without burdensome obligations and promises. But everything changed when Travis started dating another woman. The news of her ex-boyfriend's new passion came as a real blow to Jody. She could not come to terms with the thought that Travis now belonged to another. Jealousy clouded her mind, pushing her to reckless actions. Jody began to obsessively follow Travis' life on social media. She hacked his accounts, read private correspondence, trying to find even the slightest hint of his new relationship. It became a kind of obsession for her, absorbing all her thoughts and actions. Once Travis, seemingly jokingly but with a note of anxiety, said to his friend, "Don't be surprised if one day you find me dead." Perhaps deep down, he already felt that Jody's obsession could have fatal consequences. I can say that such jokes are often a kind of cry for help. People who find themselves in toxic and dangerous relationships sometimes unconsciously send signals to others, hoping that someone will intervene and save them from the threat. But at that moment, neither Travis himself nor his friends gave proper significance to this joke. They attributed it to Jody's eccentricity and did not perceive her behavior as a real danger. Months passed and Jody's obsession only intensified. She gave Travis no peace, stalked him, threw tantrums and caused scandals. Eventually, at the end of May 2008, tired of her endless antics, Travis gave Jody an ultimatum. Either she leaves his life forever or he will be forced to take radical measures. But was Jody ready to let go of her obsession so easily? Could she come to terms with the idea that Travis would never belong to her again? The answers to these questions will sound right now because at that point, all the alarm bells were ringing at full force, foreshadowing the tragic denouement of this story. At the beginning of 2008, Travis had grand plans. He organized a business trip to Mexico, which was to take place on June 15th. And interestingly, he initially planned this trip together with Jody. It would seem to be an ideal opportunity for lovers to spend time together, combining work and leisure under the scorching Mexican sun. But in April, the situation changed dramatically. Travis suddenly informed Jody that the plans had changed, and instead of her, he had decided to take another girl with him. We can only imagine what a blow this was for Jody, who had already managed to paint a perfect picture of their joint trip in her imagination. And so, the night of June 2nd arrived. Around 2 o'clock, Jody, unable to bear the tension, began calling Travis. She dialed his number 4 times in a row, but he stubbornly did not answer. Perhaps he already felt then that a conversation with Jody would not bring anything good and tried to avoid conflict. The longest call lasted only 17 seconds. Imagine this picture. Jody engulfed in jealousy and anger, pressing the call button again and again, and Travis, tired of her intrusiveness, simply looking at the phone screen, not daring to answer. But Jody did not give up. She kept calling, and eventually Travis couldn't stand it. He answered her call, and they talked for 18 minutes at first, and then for another 41 minutes. One can only guess what they were talking about and how tense this conversation was. The last conversation between them lasted 2 minutes and 48 seconds. What was said in those nearly 3 minutes? Did Jody try to convince Travis to change his plans one last time? Or maybe she was already threatening him with reprisals. Unfortunately, we will never know for sure. I have seen many similar cases. When one person obsessively pursues another, giving them no peace day or night, it can drive even the most resilient personality to despair. And unfortunately, such situations often end in tragedy. So we have every reason to assume that these nightly calls from Jody became a kind of point of no return in her relationship with Travis. She could not come to terms with his decision to take another girl with him on the trip and was ready to do anything to hinder these plans. And Travis, in turn, was already tired of her constant tantrums and scandals and sought to break this toxic bond as soon as possible. After that fateful phone conversation with Travis, Jody decided to act. She rented a car, intending to make a long trip to the state of Utah. At first, her path led through Southern California, where she visited her friends at a work conference. It would seem to be an ordinary stop along the way, but as it turned out later, it had far-reaching consequences. During her stay in California, Jody met with Ryan Burns, Travis' colleague, and it was from him that we learned several interesting details. It turns out that at the time of the meeting with Burns, Jody's blonde hair had already been dyed dark chestnut. Moreover, Burns noticed cuts on her hands. A strange change of image and injuries, don't you think? It seems that Jody was preparing for something important and tried to disguise her appearance. On June 6th, Jody left California for Utah, stopping by the city of Alta along the way. All this time, she tried to contact Travis, leaving him numerous voice messages. Her obsession reached such a level that she even managed to gain access to the voicemail system of his mobile phone. One can only guess what words she left in those messages and whether they contained threats against Travis. When returning the rented car, Jody had to explain a few strange things. First, according to the seller, the car managed to accumulate about 3,000 miles in a short period of time. Second, the rental clerk noticed the absence of floor mats in the cabin and the presence of suspicious red stains on the seats. However, unfortunately, these stains were never thoroughly investigated, as the company rushed to clean the car before the police examined it. As an experienced detective, I cannot help but note that all these details raise serious suspicions. Why did Jody need to change her appearance so drastically? Why were there cuts on her hands? And most importantly, what were the mysterious red stains found in the car she rented? All these questions suggest that something sinister is hiding behind Jody's outward decency. Of course, at that moment, no one could have predicted what tragic events this seemingly ordinary trip would lead to. But from the height of the years lived and taking into account all the circumstances of the case, we can say with confidence that it was during that period that Jody embarked on a dark path from which there was no turning back. So let's set aside these alarming details for now and move a few days forward, when Travis' friends sounded the alarm, unable to contact him. It was their persistence and concern that led to the terrible discovery that forever changed the course of this story. On June 9th, Travis' friends sounded the alarm. They had not been able to contact him for several days, which was extremely unusual for such a communicative person. Even his roommates had not seen Travis during this time, simply thinking that he had gone somewhere on business. But the friends' concern grew with each passing hour, and they decided to visit his home to check if everything was all right. What they saw upon entering Travis' apartment was forever etched in their memory. There was a huge pool of blood on the floor, and Travis' body itself lay in the shower. It is hard to even imagine the shock and horror that gripped his friends at that moment. Without wasting a second, they called 911, summoning emergency services. The dispatcher, taking the call, asked standard questions. One of them concerned whether Travis was prone to suicide. Of course, his friends rejected such a possibility. They knew Travis as a cheerful and positive person who would never take such a step. Another question was more alarming. Was there anyone from Travis' circle who might wish him harm? And then Travis' friends remembered Jody Arias, Travis' ex-girlfriend. They said that she literally stalked him, was wildly jealous, and even resorted to such extremes as hacking his Facebook page and damaging the tires of his car. It seemed that Jody was obsessed with Travis and could not come to terms with the fact that he had left her. As a detective with many years of experience, I immediately realized that this information could be key to the investigation. Obsession and aggressive behavior of former partners often lead to tragic consequences, and although at that moment it was still too early to draw final conclusions, Jody Arias automatically fell into the list of main suspects. Of course, investigators could not rule out other versions. Perhaps Travis had some enemies that even his closest friends did not know about, or it could have been an ordinary robbery gone wrong. But with each new detail, with each new fact that surfaced during the investigation, the arrow of suspicion increasingly pointed towards Jody. Now the cops needed to act quickly and in a coordinated manner. Interrogate all possible witnesses, gather evidence, track the movements of suspects. Every minute was worth its weight in gold because the killer was still at large and could strike again at any moment. When the detectives arrived at the crime scene and began a thorough search of Travis' apartment, one of the first finds made us shudder. A camera was found in the washing machine. At first glance, nothing strange nowadays. Many people have digital cameras. But during further investigation, it turned out that this camera had been purchased quite recently, and most importantly, it was damaged. Such details immediately made us wary. Later, technical experts set about restoring the data from the camera, and what they found came as a real shock. In the recovered images, we saw Jody Arias and Travis in rather intimate poses. The pictures were dated June 4th around 2 p.m. It turns out that on that day, Jody was in Travis' apartment, and more than just a friendly meeting was taking place between them. But the most shocking thing was that the camera contained photographs of Travis immediately before the murder, during it, and even after. It was like some kind of eerie photo report taken by the killer himself. The last photo in which Travis was still alive was taken at 5:29 p.m. on the same day, and literally a few minutes later, the camera captured bloody scenes in his bathroom. In these terrible pictures, one could make out the silhouette of a person, probably Travis, lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood. The red liquid spread across the floor, creating eerie patterns, and on the wall of the corridor leading to the bathroom, a bloody handprint was clearly visible. Later, the examination showed that the print contained mixed DNA of both Jody and Travis. In fact, investigators obtained irrefutable evidence that Jody Arias was present at the crime scene at the time of Travis' murder. Her intimate photos with the victim and taken just a few hours before his death, as well as her handprints at the crime scene, all this spoke in favor of the fact that she was the main suspect. It was necessary to carefully analyze each photograph, each detail in order to reconstruct an accurate picture of the events of that fatal day. But even then, we felt that we had taken a huge step towards solving this horrific crime. Now law enforcement had not just the testimony of friends about Jodi's obsession and aggressive behavior. In their hands were photographs that irrefutably proved her involvement in the murder, and although there was still a lot of work ahead of us, we were filled with determination to see the case through to the end and bring the perpetrators to justice. Only one question remained: why? What could have pushed a young woman to commit such a terrible crime? Love, jealousy, hatred. Or maybe there was something more behind this, something we did not yet understand. Believe me, what happened next just shocked me. July 15, 2008 became a decisive day in this case. It was then, based on the evidence gathered, that Jodi Arias was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. What happened next can boldly be called a theater of the absurd. At first, Jodi completely denied her presence in the city on the day of the crime. She claimed that the last time she saw Travis was back in March of that year. Imagine the shock we felt upon hearing such outright lies. After all, we had irrefutable evidence in our hands that it was on June 4th that Jodi was in Travis' apartment, and not just there, but had an intimate relationship with him. But the most impressive thing was that Jodi managed to stick to this false version for a whole 2 years. Only after such a long time, realizing perhaps that her position did not stand up to any criticism, she suddenly changed her testimony. Now she claimed that she was indeed in Travis' apartment on the night of the murder, but only because he himself had called her. Eventually, in March 2013, after long weeks of trial, Jodi Arias was found guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. The jury could not come to a unanimous decision on the death penalty, so Jodi was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. But even behind bars, this woman continued to amaze with her behavior. During interrogations, she could suddenly start singing, laughing, talking to herself, or even doing a handstand. It was so strange and inappropriate that even seasoned guards could not contain their surprise. But perhaps the most shocking thing for me was the fact that Jodi attended Travis' memorial service. She came there, although she knew for sure that everyone suspected her of this terrible murder. And the whole time, while Travis' friends and relatives were mourning his death, Jodi sat with a stone face. She did not shed a single tear, did not show any sympathy. It seemed that she was not at all worried about the grief of other people. Now Jodi Arias is serving her sentence in the Arizona State Prison Complex. And even there, she manages to be in the spotlight. Recently, in one interview, she said that she receives a lot of love from fans behind bars. "There is so much love in my direction that I can't even respond to it now," she said with a smile. In April 2019, Jodi filed an appeal against her sentence, claiming that she did not receive a fair trial. But on March 24, 2020, the Arizona Court of Appeals upheld the verdict without changes. Thus ended one of the loudest and most scandalous criminal cases in US history. On the evening of Friday, April 20th, 2012, the Solis family had a very pleasant time. Rebecca and Sergio's two sons played a baseball game in which their 6-year-old sister, young Isabelle, was present. The game lasted until 10 o'clock, after which the family returned home. The next morning, the girl was supposed to play baseball and Rebecca braided her hair so as not to waste time before work. At 11 o'clock, Sergio wished his daughter good night and left. Although Isabelle had her own bedroom, she often slept in her brother's room. But on this particular night, she stayed alone. Soon, Becky and the boys went to sleep, and Sergio fell asleep on the couch, watching a baseball game he had recorded earlier. At 5 o'clock, the man woke up and slowly made his way to the bedroom. The house was quiet and peaceful when he went to sleep next to his wife. 2 hours later, Rebecca left for work at the medical center. The woman didn't notice anything strange in the house and didn't hear anything. She didn't go into her daughter's room before leaving for work. At around 8 o'clock in the morning, Sergio went to wake his daughter up to go to the game, but Isabelle was not in her bed. He asked his sons if they had seen their sister, but nobody responded. Together with the boys, he searched the house and called for Isabelle, but there was no answer. Then, Sergio Jr., who was 14 years old at the time, noticed that the window in his sister's room was wide open and the protective screen was lying on the ground in the yard. The husband called his wife. While Rebecca was racing home, and the sons were frantically searching the neighborhood for their younger sister, Sergio called the rescue service.
This was the call that later sparked a lot of controversy and criticism towards him. People react differently in a state of stress or panic, but Sergio was surprisingly calm and collected during the call. Besides his calmness, it seemed strange to many that he immediately stated that his daughter had been kidnapped. He even laughed when he mentioned telling his wife to come home. Later, Sergio explained that he was simply trying to remain calm to provide the police with all the information they needed. Interestingly, the neighbor also called 911 on behalf of Sergio Jr. Unlike his father, he was shaking and clearly upset, but he also immediately stated that his sister had been kidnapped and they wouldn't find her. Then the phone was handed over to Rebecca, who had also been in a panic and despair when she arrived home. She was able to give a precise description of the clothing that her daughter was wearing before her disappearance. The arriving officers indeed found a protective screen on the bedroom window of the girl on the ground in the yard. There was a large hole in it, as if someone had used a tool to make it. Soft toys were always lying under the girl's window in the room, and now they were scattered in disorder. Blood was discovered on the floor next to Isabelle. Shoe prints were found behind the house, on the alley and on the electrical box under the high fence of the family. Presumably, the perpetrator climbed over it when he abducted the girl. The police organized massive searches, going from door to door, believing it was a kidnapping case, rejecting the idea that the 6-year-old girl could have run away. The neighbor of the Celis family, Alicia Stardivant, said that she was woken up by a noise around 6:30 a.m. Her bedroom is literally across the fence from the girl's room. The girl said that she heard her dogs and the Celis family dogs barking. Besides them, she heard men's voices, seemingly on her side of the fence, not at the Celis family's home. But it was already getting light outside, and she didn't pay attention to it and fell asleep again. Alicia noted that the men did not lower their voices or whisper, and she didn't think for a second that there was also a small child there. The police set up a checkpoint around the Celis family's house and only allowed local residents through. The search initially focused on a small area around the house because in most cases, children are killed within a radius of 100 meters from the place of abduction. Then they expanded the search radius, included several apartment buildings, and interviewed residents. Officers checked the stadium where Isabelle's baseball game was supposed to take place, the local garbage dump. The lakes and ponds were inspected with underwater cameras and sonars. Forensic experts and search dogs searched the Celis family's home, and border guards distributed photos of Isabelle because when children go missing in Arizona, there is a high chance they end up on the other side of the border with Mexico. In addition, in 2012, 16 criminals who had committed violent acts against women and children lived near the family's home. All of them were interrogated and excluded at that time. A theory emerged that someone had noticed Isabelle playing with her brothers in the evening, followed the family, and abducted the girl from the house at night. Following this lead, officers checked the registration numbers of all the cars in the parking lot. Surveillance video cameras located near the family's home showed an unusually active nightlife. At 2:36 a.m., a private security company's car appeared in the alley near the house, and 2 more cars were shown in the parking lot 10 minutes later. Suddenly, a large number of pedestrians were wandering around the house, some of them interested in garbage cans, and an hour before the 911 call, a car quickly turned the corner near the trash can. But the girl did not appear anywhere in the 10 hours of filming. However, something interesting was discovered during the search of the house by the police. The officers found inscriptions on the door frame of Isabelle's wardrobe. The inscriptions were written in a child's handwriting and included such words as bad father, I don't love father, and bad day. Rebecca claimed she had no idea about this, but the police decided to interrogate Isabelle's family more thoroughly. One of the sons revealed that when their father drank, he became aggressive, cursed, and hit him twice. Therefore,
investigators invited employees of the Child Protection Services concerned about the Solis sons, especially since, as it turned out, Child Protection Services had been called to the family's home more than once. In January 2012, one of the boys was washing dishes and left a glass in the detergent. Sergio drank water from that glass and scolded his son for his mistake. Rebecca insists that they laughed about the incident. But the next day, the boy told his friends about it, and someone's parents contacted the Child Protection Services. Anyway, in May 2012, at their request, Sergio voluntarily left the house, although Rebecca claimed that her husband was an excellent father and when Isabelle returned home, all questions would be answered. Although the incident was soon resolved, and Sergio was able to return home to his wife and sons, the family was upset that the investigation did not bring any results. Although the incident was soon resolved and Sergio was able to return home to his wife and children, the family was upset that the police continued to focus on them, especially Sergio, despite never being named a suspect. Later, the man stated, "It feels like the investigation never went beyond this house. That's what's so upsetting." So they hired private detective Jerry Snyder to conduct an unbiased investigation into Isabelle's abduction. And his suspicions fell on Rebecca's cousin, Justin Mastromarino. At first, Justin acted as a representative of the family, constantly speaking to journalists and giving interviews. But within 2 weeks of Isabelle's disappearance, he sent his car to Florida, hired the best lawyer, and left, refusing to answer reporters or police's questions. Such behavior seemed strange to the private detective. Moreover, Justin had lived in the Solis family's home for a long time and still had a key to the house. There was a version that Justin, who had previously stayed overnight in Isabelle's room, could owe money to someone and the criminal came for him. But instead of Justin, he found Isabelle in the room and took her for ransom or as leverage. On the other hand, his friend Sebastian Hartsfield is confident that Mastromarino did the right thing, and if he had the means, he would have left too. The thing is, Justin was tired of the intrusive attention of the media and the public. Sebastian said that they spent the evening of the abduction together with Justin. He reluctantly admits that it was April 20th, National Cannabis Day, so he and Justin smoked and drank all evening, although there was a 6-hour gap when they were asleep, and he cannot say for sure where Justin was. Sebastian is confident in his friend's innocence. When the police finally questioned Justin, the police chief said that the investigator hired by the family had no evidence, but the police were absolutely sure of Justin's innocence. It is worth noting that Sergio was also suspected of owing money to bad people, and his daughter was kidnapped for ransom. Isabelle was at the age when children are more often abducted by relatives. She was kidnapped from the house where only her relatives were present, and Sergio was the last person to see her, kissing her goodnight at 11 o'clock. He did not pass a polygraph test. Moreover, the fact that the dogs barked at night indirectly confirms the involvement of someone from the family. How could a stranger know where the girl's room was, that she wouldn't be sleeping in her brother's bedroom, and that there would be no dogs in her room? Usually, at least one of them slept in her bedroom. How could the kidnapper know exactly how to avoid the surveillance cameras located on the street? Yet, besides suspicion, there was nothing linking Sergio or Justin to the crime. Where was Isabelle? Let's go back to the morning of July 23, 2012, when the rescue service received 3 distress calls. A child, a girl, called and said she wanted to report a kidnapping. She mentioned Isabelle's name and said he's coming, identified the district where she was located, and then the call disconnected. The officers went to the specified district, but they didn't find anyone. They traced the call to an apartment building where 2 sisters, aged 9 and 11, lived. The sisters had simply decided to play a prank. The calls caused a lot of fuss, but they were quickly released. However, their joke cost the city $4,700 in officers' wages spent on the search in the district specified by the girls. After this incident, the police tried several times to draw attention to the case, for example,
by sharing an image of what Isabelle might look like several years later. But despite all efforts, there was no progress in the case for years. Who kidnapped Isabelle? Was it someone unknown to the family who entered through a window and took her? Did Justin consider kidnapping Isabelle because he was in debt and wanted to demand a ransom, but the kidnapping went wrong? Was one of her brothers involved in what happened to her, and are their relatives covering it up? Or does Isabelle's biological father know more than he's saying? Unexpectedly, on February 8, 2017, there was a breakthrough in the case. A woman named Melissa contacted the FBI and stated that they should speak to her fiancé, Christopher Clements, about the disappearance of Isabelle. Supposedly, he might know something about the girl's disappearance, but Melissa couldn't say anything more and they should talk to him. Finding Christopher proved to be quite easy. He was in jail on charges of robbery. Christopher confirmed to the agents that he knew where to find Isabelle, but demanded a deal. In exchange for information about Isabelle's whereabouts, he wants his charges dropped, his confiscated Acura Honda returned, and full immunity in Isabelle's case. He assured them that he only knows what happened to the girl. It is also known to a member of the Celis family. He hinted that Sergio knew about the kidnapping of his daughter and was involved in it. Christopher told them that Sergio was seen handing over Mexican gold coins to someone at a local pawn shop. Supposedly, there was a fight and Isabelle was taken to get the money that her father owed for the stolen coins. Christopher spoke very broadly, and no matter how much the agents questioned him, he didn't go into details. The man stood his ground, information in exchange for a deal. He got what he wanted. The prosecutor's office went for a deal, dropped the charges of robbery and returned the car. The man revealed where to find Isabelle, and on March 3, 2017, the police and the FBI found her remains. Rebecca and Sergio Solis faced the grim confirmation that Isabelle had left forever. Whatever dreams they had of a happy reunion were destroyed. However, the deal did not give Christopher Clements the desired freedom. Instead, he was transferred to the Maricopa County Jail, where he was charged with another robbery. The agreement did not provide full immunity, which Christopher insisted on in Isabelle's case. Investigators began digging deeper into the man's past. He started his criminal career at the age of 16 by committing first-degree violence. Since then, he had repeatedly gotten into trouble. The man's ex-wife said that Christopher was obsessed with adult movies, often brought girls from strip clubs home, and she was forced to sleep in the car until they left. And at the time of Isabelle's disappearance, he worked at a shopping center only 2 kilometers away from her home. Undoubtedly, detectives checked Sergio's connection to the nearby pawn shop mentioned by Christopher. They found out that 21 gold coins were stolen from the woman's house 2 months before Isabelle's abduction, and they believed that Christopher committed the theft. The surveillance camera captured him entering the pawn shop hours after the theft, delivering the goods, and receiving the money. The video did not suggest Sergio's involvement or any connection to the case. Most likely, Christopher was just studying the accusations against Sergio, which were mentioned in the press, and was talking to agents, trying to cast a shadow on the girl's father. The police received several search warrants, including one for the house where Christopher and his fiancée Melissa used to live. In one corner of the yard, investigators found a sheet of plywood under which was a plastic container containing ashes and several gruesome discoveries, including a faded lilac child's hoodie with a hood and a school assignment of a very young child with the name Mercedes on it. Her full name was Isabelle Mercedes Celis. They also found indecent photos of girls aged 3 to 13 on Christopher's devices. Searches on his computer included Isabelle Celis, unsolved cases in Arizona, and child killer acquitted. A former acquaintance of Christopher's said he talked about the Isabelle case and let slip that there might be evidence in the trunk of his car, so it was crucial to bring it back. The car was described as a Honda Acura that was returned to the man in exchange for information about Isabelle's whereabouts. It is still unknown how Isabelle died, but according to the same acquaintance, she was suffocated and her body was doused with chemicals. The man remembered that Christopher showed him photos of the Tsellis house that he had hidden in a Bible in his room. Investigators obtained a warrant for this Bible and indeed found pictures of the house. 2 months later, the Tucson police chief announced that they had a suspect, 36-year-old Christopher Clements, who had been charged with not 1, but 2 murders. The thing is, on March 3, 2017, when Christopher described to agents the location where they would find Isabelle, he mentioned an important marker, a pile of tires that clearly did not appear there in just 1 day. This instruction immediately alarmed the agents, because a few years ago, the police found the body of a teenage girl from Tucson near that same tire pile. The girl's name was Maribel Gonzalez. In June 2014, 2 years had passed since Isabelle's disappearance, when a rescue service dispatcher answered a horrifying call. A woman reported a body she had noticed by the roadside. The police who arrived on the call found signs that someone had been dragged on the ground, the smell of decay, and a naked body buried under the pile of tires. It was a location significantly distant from the nearest houses. The police shared with the media a photo of a chain with an anchor that the girl was wearing, as well as a tattoo on her collarbone, in hopes that the public would help identify her. Indeed, several people called the police saying that it was 13-year-old Maribel Gonzalez. Maribel's family said that she was seeing a 20-year-old man named Mariano. They had been together for 3 years but broke up a month before Maribel disappeared. Mariano told the police that she sent him a message around 11 to 12 p.m. on the day of her disappearance, asking him to pick her up because she had a fight with her mother. He ignored her message because he had to get up early for work. He never saw her again. Her boyfriend said that she loved to walk alone, even at night. She also liked to go to the mall, the same one near Isabelle's house where Christopher Clements worked. The police linked these cases based on the fact that the bodies were found in close proximity to each other. Christopher's DNA was compared to the DNA found on Maribel, and it matched. Isabelle was kidnapped and killed 2 years before Maribel. Could the perpetrator have been caught after the first crime and prevented Maribel's death? It turns out that Christopher's name came up during the investigation before his conversation with the agents in 2018, more than once. As it is already known, the officers contacted all individuals who committed sexual crimes and lived nearby Isabelle, violent acts against women and children. The list contained 16 names, including Christopher. He was listed as a Class 3 offender, meaning with a very high likelihood of reoffending. The police talked to him, but obviously, he was able to convince the officer that he had nothing to do with the case. Perhaps his girlfriend provided him with an alibi. Furthermore, after Isabelle's disappearance, her parents asked to recall any unexpected meetings, uninvited guests, traders, advertising agents, distributors, anyone who could arouse suspicion. Rebecca immediately remembered a man who was interested in their red Acura. He came twice, but the woman did not know his name, and he never entered the house. Interestingly, Christopher also mentioned that meeting during the interrogations. This is what he told FBI agents on February 10, 2017. According to him, 2 people pretended to be interested in the car. In fact, they needed to make sure that Sergio lived at that address. They approached Rebecca, and she gave them the phone number and said that they needed to talk about the possibility of buying from her husband Sergio. Thus, the men confirmed what they wanted. Christopher said that he just knew about this visit, but he himself never approached the Solisev's house. However, during the conversation, he several times referred to we instead of they, as if confessing that one of the men was him. Christopher's description of the visit coincides with Rebecca's story, except for one detail. The woman described only one man who matched Christopher's description and drove the same car as he did. But her description differs slightly from the description given by her husband. What if the police had followed this lead immediately after Isabelle's disappearance? Would it have led them to Christopher Clements?
Investigators believe that the kidnapping of Isabelle was not spontaneous. Christopher had planned his crimes. He repeatedly called the home of the woman from whom he stole gold coins when she was not home. He also called the Sellis family home as early as October 2011. The day after the kidnapping, Christopher changed his phone number and washed his car. If cleaning his car usually cost him around $10, $35, this time he paid $110. However, changing his phone number did not help, as phone records linked Christopher to 2 crimes. Footprints found at the scene of Isabelle's kidnapping matched sneakers that no one in the Sellis family wore, but which Christopher was often seen wearing and even photographed in. Detectives also studied photos on his devices and found a miniature snapshot. It was a selfie of a man on the front seat of a car who looked like Clements, and a little girl lying on the back seat who was extremely similar to Isabelle. The photo was shown to Sergio and Rebecca. The woman agreed that the girl resembled Isabelle, but she could not say for sure because the image quality was terrible. Christopher claimed the child in the photo was his son. But when the photo was shown to Melissa, his fiancée, she began to shake. She did not recognize the child as her own. The child in the photo did not resemble the 1.5-year-old fair-haired boy. Instead, it was more like a dark-haired girl with her hair braided, which Isabelle's mother had done just before the kidnapping. The defense argued that the footprints were initially described as work boots. Christopher did not have his phone with him during those calls, and the blood in Isabelle's bedroom probably appeared before the kidnapping. Christopher's lawyers successfully pushed for 2 separate trials, one for the Isabelle case and one for the Maribel case, so that the prosecutor could not present evidence for both crimes at once. However, this did not help him much because he had already been found guilty of Maribel Gonzalez's murder. He still has to face trial for the kidnapping of Isabelle. On February 19, 2001, at the Battlebridge Basin, a part of the Regent's Canal in London, 10 body parts belonging to an unidentified woman were discovered. The body parts were found in 6 different bags and weighed down with bricks. Who was she, and who killed her? These hastily dismembered remains belonged to an ex-girlfriend of John Sweeney, a jealous, perpetually drunken, and vengeful sadist. He referred to himself as a scalp hunter, but the press dubbed him the Canal Killer. Born John Patrick Sweeney on Saturday, October 13, 1956, the boy grew up in Kirkdale, a working-class district of Liverpool. Sweeney's childhood was unremarkable and devoid of significant events. Although his family was poor, his parents instilled in him a sense of pride, moral values, and the importance of hard work. The boy dreamed of studying art, but he was convinced to choose a more reliable profession. Thus, after training as a carpenter, for 5 years John traveled to different countries, working on construction sites with a bag full of tools, pockets full of cash, and eyes fixed on women. It was during this little-known episode of his life that something changed in John. When he returned to Britain several years later, he came back as an envious, jealous, and malicious person whose life was consumed by a passion for alcohol, illicit substances, and violence. Upon returning to Liverpool, John still looked like the boy who had left a few years earlier, with his tousled red hair and mischievous sparks in his eyes. But his almost childlike face, which always seemed kind and smiling, concealed a growing rage within him. After meeting the lovely Anne Bramley in 1976, John married her and moved in with her. Soon after, they had children. However, it was not a happy union. John was either absent from home and uninvolved in raising the children, or he behaved aggressively and horrifically abused his wife. He often used different aliases, such as Joe Johnson, Joe Carroll, or Liverpool Joe, to hide the increasing number of charges against him for various offences. In 1979, after 3 years of marriage, concerned for the safety of her children and repeatedly reporting her husband to the police, Anne made a courageous decision and filed for divorce. 2 years later, she gave John one last chance, believing that he had changed, overcome his addiction, and that a bright future awaited them. But her husband had not changed. He was still intoxicated, drugged, and dangerous, and he was consumed by a desire for revenge. He was not going to allow her to leave him again. Their second marriage lasted barely a year. Anne escaped to her family in the middle of the night. But no matter how far she ran or how carefully she hid, John always found her. In November 1982, settling with her children in a cottage in a small town, and thought she had found refuge, but her peace was shattered because John Sweeney followed her. In the evening, when a piercing wind blew from the hills, covering the moon with dense clouds, and the snow crunched under his feet, John approached the new home of the family. Through a gap in the curtains, he noticed a light in the house but heard no sound and saw no movement. Realizing that nobody was home, the man broke the lock on the back door. Inside, seeing food on the table, children's toys on the floor, and family photos on the fireplace mantel, he felt even more acutely rejected by Anne. John slipped into the darkness of his wife's bedroom, opened the closet, and hid inside. And while he stood there, surrounded by familiar things, inhaling the scent of her perfume, surrounded by everything that reminded him of her departure, John waited for his wife's return with a hammer in one hand and an axe in the other. He didn't have to wait long. Just 2 minutes later, he heard the jingling of her keys. The front door opened, and light sequentially filled each room until he heard quiet footsteps in the bedroom. From the tension, the man's finger joints turned pale as he anxiously gripped the hammer and axe, prepared for a furious attack on his soon-to-be ex-wife. Waiting for the perfect moment, John burst out of the closet and saw 2 police officers in front of him, big, strong guys who already had handcuffs ready. John dropped the weapons, and thoughts raced through his mind about how to explain who he was and what he was doing in the closet with a hammer and axe. He claimed he was preparing a surprise for his wife. One can only guess what kind of surprise it would have been if the police officers hadn't shown up. However, luckily for Anne and the children, they were having a pleasant evening at the neighbor's house when they heard the sound as if someone had entered their home. Assuming it was a burglar, they called the police. John was arrested, but he was not charged with attempted murder or anything similar. Since it is difficult to prove intentions to commit a crime, and considering that everything happened in what could formally be considered his own home, the law couldn't do anything to him. He was released on the condition of staying away from Anne. John started over and moved to London. He returned to Liverpool only to visit his mother. Although he and Anne crossed paths more than once, they managed to maintain civilized relations for the sake of the children until her death in 2001. In the same year, 10 body parts, placed in 6 separate bags and weighted down with bricks, were dumped at the Battlebridge Basin Canal in London. But the body in the canal did not belong to Anne. John never again attempted to take her life. Perhaps he never had the opportunity again, perhaps he still loved her, or perhaps he knew it was wrong to deprive the children of a caring mother. Thus, with the same fury in his eyes, jealousy in his heart, and impatient tremor in his hands, John set off once again in search of love, an unsuspecting girl whom he would attempt to control, and her name was Melissa Halstead. But this time, he turned to his other passion, art, and his dark paintings would unveil the veil of mystery over his much more sinister plans. Born in Ohio, Melissa Halstead was a bright, courageous, and cheerful girl whose free-spirited nature was balanced by kindness and inner warmth. Melissa always saw the best in people, and although it took her a long time to trust a stranger enough to become her friend, once you became her friend, you became her friend forever. At the age of 15, scouts from the renowned Ford modeling agency in New York took notice of the beautiful and striking girl, and that's where her career began. She traveled across America, Europe, and Asia. By 1986, after a successful modeling career and obtaining education as a makeup artist and photographer, Melissa settled in London in anticipation of a new chapter in her life. Melissa hardly told her family anything about her new boyfriend, whom everyone called Liverpool Joe. Whatever she saw in this red-haired, moody figure was a mystery to everyone, but whatever it was, it wasn't worth it. Because the man didn't hesitate to disfigure her beautiful face, using his fists in fits of drunken rage. These were alarming signs, and Melissa repeatedly tried to leave. Over the course of 12 months of living together, Melissa and John Sweeney, the police were called to her rescue twice when he brutally beat her. But both times, John only received a slap on the wrist, forcing him to pay a fine of £5. In April 1988, the man frightened poor Melissa so much, waving a knife, that in a gruesome foreshadowing of her fate, she told her sister that if she ever disappeared, it meant John had killed her. This time, the court banned him from ever approaching the girl. Melissa's work visa was about to expire, and she continued to travel thousands of kilometers away from John, visiting Austria, France, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. But no matter how far she went, how skillfully she hid, or how cautiously she noticed traces, he always found her. His paranoia fueled by alcohol, his jealousy fueled by rejection, and the court conditions that had no significance beyond Britain allowed him to track down his supposedly unfaithful girlfriend to her new apartment in Vienna, Austria. Without realizing that the shattered relationship was his fault, and driven mad by the thought that Melissa was cheating on him, John burst into the house through the back door, found and gagged her neighbor, and searched the apartment. He examined every cabinet in search of signs of her infidelity. Melissa had learned from the experiences of his furious attacks. She knew there was no point in arguing, trying to convince him otherwise, or even dignifying him with a response. Instead, understanding that he needed time to cool down, she bought him a ticket to Amsterdam. Whether it was a clever ploy to distract a dangerous lover, a kind gesture to give him a chance to calm down, or an honest promise to resume their relationship is unknown, but it worked. John took the ticket and left. But a few days did not calm him down. On the contrary, he blamed Melissa for everything he had ever experienced because of women who deceived and rejected him. She rejected him like Anne, abandoned him like Anne, and destroyed him like Anne. John's anger came full circle, and it was time to finish what he had started, to seek revenge. On Friday, November 4th, 1988, 4 days later and almost 6 years after the failed attack on Anne, John approached Melissa's apartment. Unlike that night, Melissa was at home. Unlike that night, he didn't break in but knocked on the door. Unlike that night, when Melissa saw her stalker had returned, an argument ensued. But just like that night 6 years ago in Anne's cottage, John was prepared. The knuckles of his right hand turned white with impatience as he clenched a hammer. He told Melissa that he had calmed down and simply forgot something in her apartment. Waiting for the moment when Melissa turned her back to him, John gritted his teeth, his hand shot up, and he brought down the steel edge of the hammer on the girl's head. Melissa felt a powerful blow, and her vision instantly darkened, but miraculously she survived. Lying in a hospital bed with bruises and a brain fracture, she declared that all she wanted was to help him, but now she understood that he truly hated her. John was arrested on the same day. Hatred for the girl continued to boil in him while in prison. In his troubles, he blamed only her. And here he resorted to his favorite pastime again, drawing. His drawings were not only frightening, realistic, and highly detailed, but they also served as a confession of the thoughts and desires that consumed him. His imagination was so deranged that it's hard to describe it in words. The most disturbing sketch he sarcastically titled Romantic Weekend 2 in Austria. But if it could be characterized in any way, it was certainly not romantic. However, Melissa knew nothing about the drawings. She believed his tears and assurances that she was all he had. So she took an unexpected step. The judge sentenced John to 12 months in prison and a 10-year ban on entering Austria to protect his victim from any danger. But he was released earlier after an emotional plea from the person he almost killed, Melissa. And on Monday, March 27, 1989, after serving only half of his sentence, 34-year-old John Sweeney walked free, inhaling the fresh Austrian air as the cold breeze played with his red beard. The stunningly beautiful Blom, a former model, kissed him on the lips. Melissa arrived in a car full of luggage to pick up John. They headed to the Netherlands, where they wouldn't be bothered by the deportation order, to start a new life together. However, those 6 months in prison did nothing to rid the man of his drinking habit, his use of illicit substances, his paranoia, jealousy, and his obsession with violence and torture. And their new home was as libertine and indulgent as it was an unsuitable place for someone like him. Although John occasionally worked, his earnings were only enough for alcohol, and it was Melissa's successful career that allowed them to pay for housing, food, and other expenses. Month after month, the beatings were repeated, which the girl concealed behind expertly applied makeup and poorly thought-out excuses. Thanks to her work as a photographer and makeup artist, she traveled a lot, but the more she was absent, the more John drank and filled himself with jealousy and rage. Finally, in late April 1990, Melissa returned home to Amsterdam, to the apartment she shared with her boyfriend. She decided to break up with him for good. On Thursday, May 3, 1990, in a coastal town called Rotterdam, located 50 miles from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, a military-style bag appeared on the surface of a canal. Upon seeing it, 2 police officers decided it was either stolen luggage or discarded trash. Inside, they found the torso of a naked woman. Just the torso, without hands, feet, or a head, and there were no belongings or documents present. The perpetrator had removed them and snapped the unfortunate victim's spine in half to fit her into the bag. She had spent just over a week in the water before being discovered. However, that was all the police could determine for certain because the killer had made maximum efforts to destroy all clues to her identity. The skull injury from a recent attack by her boyfriend could have provided a clue to her identity besides dental records, but all the police had was an unnamed torso, lacking any name, teeth, surgical scars, birthmarks, tattoos, or fingerprints. Since no missing persons matching her description had been reported in Rotterdam, Melissa was marked as Jane Doe and buried in an unmarked grave in a local cemetery. We will never know exactly how or where she died. We do not know how her killer transported her body from Amsterdam to Rotterdam. Perhaps he took a train, wondering what other passengers would think if they knew what was in his bag. But we do know that in Rotterdam, he chose a canal that ran through the heart of the city, waited for the opportune moment, and simply tossed the bag into the water. As Melissa worked a lot and traveled on assignments, her family in Ohio did not immediately realize they hadn't heard from her in a while. The last time she left a message on the answering machine, congratulating her mother on her birthday, and then she stopped calling. So in November 1990, the family hired a lawyer to investigate her disappearance. But they realized it too late. Her apartment was completely empty and meticulously cleaned, with no trace of the former tenants. Melissa had vanished, and John returned to Britain, embarking on his search for love, girls, once again. And her name was Delia Baymer. Having met John at a pub in early 1991, Delia was struck by the charisma of a man who lived a seemingly heavenly life. Being overly trusting by nature, she quickly allowed John to move into her apartment, just 1.5 miles from the Battlebridge Basin Canal in London's Paddington. But together they appeared to be a strange pair. She was a fragile blonde, a nurse who saved lives, and he was a red-haired psychopath with 1 past murder, 1 attempted murder, and at least 1 future murder. Delia brought warmth and coziness into the home, while John complemented it with illicit substances, alcohol, a tarantula, stacks of horror magazines, and a collection of gruesome paintings depicting scenes of violence, severed body parts, blood, torture, and headless female bodies. As before, he quickly revealed his true nature, striving to exert full control over Delia's life and exploding with rage if things didn't go the way he wanted. 2 years later, Delia gathered the courage to ask him to leave. He agreed, but he kept delaying the moment, continuing to exert control over every aspect of her life. In 1994, Delia managed to escape his watchful gaze and spent a day with a friend. When she returned, John flew into a rage. As punishment, he tied the helpless woman to her bed, using the same rope he had once used to bind Melissa's lifeless body. For unbearable 48 hours, he tortured Delia, repeatedly violating her, beating her, strangling her, and threatening her. John held a gun to her head and threatened to cut out her tongue with a kitchen knife if she screamed. In his frenzy, he began to tell her the story of his previous girlfriend, who had tried to leave him and supposedly met her end in the canals of Rotterdam. Allegedly, he caught her with 2 Germans. He killed all 3, not knowing what to do with them. He sat with the bodies for 3 days. On the 3rd day, he dismembered them, packed them into bags, and threw them into the canal. Delia had studied John well and didn't even attempt to argue, curse, resist, or scream. She didn't even allow herself to think about it, as if he could read her thoughts. Perhaps that's why, like Anne, he didn't kill her. And no one knows why. The man fled to Germany, but since the police knew his appearance and the fake names he used, he was arrested and deported back to Britain. Her tormentor sat in prison, but Delia was convinced that he would find a way to get to her sooner or later. On Thursday, December 26, 1994, 3 days before Christmas, John was put under house arrest. Just a few hours later, as the sun was setting, with a cold winter wind and snowflakes falling from the sky, Delia finished her shift and carefully rode her bicycle onto the road leading to her home. The dark street was empty, illuminated only by the flickering lights of television screens, Christmas garlands, and the dim orange glow of street lamps. Delia leaned her bicycle against the fence near the steps that led to her apartment entrance. It was quiet, peaceful, and safe, or so it seemed. As always, she propped the door with a brick and went back to get her bicycle. Delia was already halfway up the steps, looking around, asking herself if he was hiding in the darkness, when she glanced to the right again and saw his enraged face. Without wasting a second, Delia quickly pushed the brick, allowing the door of her house to slam shut right in front of her. She knew it was better to confront John on the street. If he pushed her into the house, she wouldn't stand a chance to escape. With raised hands, bulging eyes, and clenched teeth, John struck the fragile and defenseless woman with a 2-kilogram axe while reaching for a knife. He hit her in the chest, piercing her lung, then her thigh, and swung the axe, severing the tip of his finger. Delia could have died, but she didn't. She pulled the bicycle towards her to shield herself from the blows. The sound of the axe scraping against the metal of the bicycle was heard by her neighbor, Giles Allen. Grabbing a baseball bat, he rushed out of his house and chased after John on the street. But John quickly vanished into the darkness, being the coward that he was, afraid to confront a worthy opponent, someone like himself. For the next 6 years, while John remained on the run, friends warned Delia to be cautious, believing that he would come back to finish what he started. But Delia didn't care anymore because she was no longer herself. And even though, after 6 years, 10 parts of a woman's body, carefully packed into 6 different bags, would be discovered at Battlebridge Basin, a London dock in the Regent's Canal, bearing a striking resemblance to Melissa's murder, Delia Bamer would not be the victim. That woman was still alive, because she still had to become John Sweeney's future ex-girlfriend. Having gone on the run, John didn't make much effort to lay low. He headed north, where he visited his mother, as well as his ex-wife Anne and their children. On January 2, 1995, just 11 days after the attack on Delia, John sent a letter to the police and Scotland Yard, boasting about his crimes and claiming they would never catch him. Since the red-haired butcher was easy to find, he decided to hide in another European country. He disappeared from all radars for 6 years. What happened to him during those years, where he was, what he did, and whom he possibly killed, remains unknown. The only certainty is that he returned to his gruesome drawings, promising brutal retribution against women who dared reject him. However, in early 2000, he came back to Britain, where he resumed his search for love. And her name was Paula Fields. As one of 11 children in a poor family living in the poorest district of Liverpool, Paula's childhood, along with her brothers and sisters, was challenging, but their troubles were only beginning. When Paula was 9 years old, her mother passed away, and the children were sent to relatives or placed in shelters. As she grew older, Paula tried her best to become a great mother to her own children. That's why she decided to move to London in search of a better life for her 3 sons, but things only got worse. After 2 years of constant hunger, suffering, and despair, she turned to the oldest profession. In the autumn of 2000, as a homeless woman of loose morals, with no chance of regaining custody of her children, who had been taken by Child Protective Services, Paula's life seemed to hit rock bottom. It was during this time that she met and fell in love with a bearded, red-haired butcher known as Liverpool Joe. Paula, battered and beaten, moved in with him. But what began as an endless cycle of emotional blackmail, psychological pressure, and physical violence soon led to her demise. At 9:30 a.m. on Friday, December 15, 2000, Paula was last seen entering John's apartment. Just 2 days later, the true nature of her beloved was revealed, and 2 days before he moved out of the rented flat, Paula was never seen alive again. On Monday, February 19, 2001, during the school holidays, 2 school children were fishing at the Battlebridge Basin when they noticed a partially submerged black bag. Being boys, they retrieved the heavy bag, hoping to find treasures or at least stolen valuable items. They were shocked for the rest of their lives when they opened the bag and found bricks and body parts. The police recovered 5 more similar bags from the water, but they did not find any hands, feet, heads, or any items or documents. Like Melissa, Paula could have become another Jane Doe, as John had once again gotten away with murder. Or he would have, if he hadn't made a huge mistake. He left one victim alive. Since the police became aware that the wanted assailant for the attack on Delia Bamer had been seen in London, all constables received his description. On Friday, March 23, 2001, the red-haired butcher Joe Johnson was spotted at a construction site. Knowing that he might be armed, the police added their most prepared officers. He indeed had a knife and a gun in his locker. In his apartment, they found more weapons, ammunition, machetes, a homemade bamboo garrote, a baseball bat, a wig with brunette hair, a change of clothes, an axe, handcuffs, garbage bags, a bag with saws and hammers, and over 200 drawings and poems depicting torture, dismemberment, and the death of women. For the attempted murder of Delia, John was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And although he boasted about many murders of his former girlfriends, as well as presumably 2 Germans whom he allegedly caught in bed with Melissa, without evidence, the law was powerless, and investigators feared that John would be released early from prison in a few years and simply disappear. But then another victim of John provided an important clue that helped remove the dangerous criminal from the streets forever. And she did it from beyond the grave. On June 12, 2007, thanks to the advancement of genetic technology, the Dutch police obtained the DNA of the woman whose torso was pulled out of the Rotterdam Canal 18 years ago. By joining forces, Scotland Yard and the Dutch police not only identified Melissa and Paula but also linked their murders, the method of disposing of the bodies, and the identity of the killer, John Swine. In court, the most reliable and crucial evidence against the defendant became his own paintings and poems. Detectives were able to establish a chilling connection between the drawings and the murders he was suspected of. In particular, on one drawing, investigators noticed an element hidden under correction fluid. Under ultraviolet light, forensic experts were able to see what was drawn there. It turned out to be a tombstone with the inscription, "Rest in peace, Melissa." But why would he hide this fragment of the painting if he considered all his works simply art? Because it was evidence he knew about Melissa's death long before her remains were identified. Another painting titled "Beautiful Night" in Vienna depicted an army bag with something inside. It was in such a bag that Melissa was found. However, clues were provided not only by John's paintings. 2 poems represented something like a biographical description of his relationship with Melissa, and 2 hinted or even explicitly spoke of the girl's death. For example, one poem ended with the line, "When I die, perhaps we will become one whole," meaning that she had died, and he knew it for sure. Although the press dubbed John Swine as the Canal Killer, he considered himself a scalp hunter, as he signed one of his works, an image of a man with a bloodied axe and a scalp with light hair. The hair most likely belonged to Delia, whom he dedicated the piece to, so to speak, wishing her to depart from life in the most painful way possible. The paintings depicting the murder of Paula were no less disturbing, and he continued to paint her even in prison. Although he was never tried for other murders, the police believe that John's drawings may contain clues to the identities of other victims, particularly 2 women whom the police have never been able to find. They did not find the other body parts of Melissa and Paula. Delia believes that John could have hidden them within the walls of the buildings he worked on as a carpenter. At least, that's what he did with his pet tarantula. On Monday, April 4, 2011, 54-year-old John was found guilty of the murders of Melissa and Paula. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Such a punishment is extremely rare in Britain, but the judge emphasized that Swinney is too dangerous to ever be released again. For 17 years, even the youngest residents of the French commune of Germain couldn't truly enjoy life due to the pervasive fear that gripped their families. Local resident Manon lives near the former home of the grieving family, and her parents told her about what happened when she was still a child. "We walk the same streets, so, of course, we are afraid that someone might attack or abduct us," the girl says. "My father always accompanied me, and now we finally know what he did, and he confessed to everything. That is somewhat comforting. For 17 whole years, it was impossible to see a child walking alone on the street." On January 9, 2003, 9-year-old Estelle Mouzin disappeared while returning home from school in her hometown of Germain, in the department of Seine-et-Marne near Paris. The girl lived with her mother Suzanne Mouzin, who was in the process of divorcing her husband and Estelle's father, Eric Mouzin. The father lived in the commune of Le Vessinet with her older brother Arthur, approximately 60 kilometers away from her mother's home. When Suzanne returned home from work at 7:30 p.m. and realized that her daughter was not there, she reported the child's disappearance to the police. In July 2003, the police began to suspect that serial killer Michel Fourniret might be involved in Estelle's disappearance because he had confessed to killing 7 people, including 3 young girls. Michel Fourniret and Monique Olivier appeared to be ordinary French retirees, he with his glasses and well-groomed hands in a professorial pose, and she, with her sunken cheeks, resembled a typical grandmother looking after her grandchildren. Behind this facade, however, lay one of France's most dangerous sexual predators, who committed his murders with the active involvement of his wife and faithful accomplice. This grey-haired couple stood alongside the most horrifying criminals in the country's history. Using her image as a happily married, respectable wife, Olivier instilled confidence in the girls that they had nothing to fear, while the poor victims were about to become the next prey of the killers. Once the girls were kidnapped, bound, and sometimes drugged, Olivier would inspect them, checking whether they were virgins, which her husband desired. The couple met after Fourniret was arrested in 1984 for sexual crimes in the Paris area and placed an advertisement in a newspaper seeking a pen pal. Michel and Monique corresponded for a long time, and then, as it turned out, Fourniret proposed to Olivier, a former caregiver, to get rid of her 2 ex-husbands who, according to Monique, had mistreated her. In exchange, she promised to find young girls for him. Fourniret never fulfilled his promise, but 2 months after his release in 1987, Olivier did what she called her first offering to her beast. Isabelle Laville was a shy 17-year-old girl who was seeing a therapist. Olivier said she chose her because she reminded her of her young self but was still an innocent girl that her husband desired. Olivier drove up to Isabelle in her car and asked for directions, convincing the girl to get in the car and show her the way. A little further down the road, Fourniret was waiting for them,
Pretending to be a motorist who needed help because his car broke down, Olivier stopped and allowed the man to get in. As they continued on their way, Fourniret, sitting in the back seat, strangled the girl and announced that she was now their captive. On the way back to their home, they drugged Isabelle too much. At home, Fourniret found himself unable to assault the girl, so he had sex with Monique instead, and then he killed Isabelle by strangling her. In 2006, he led the police to her remains, which were dumped in an old well. Olivier claimed she didn't know that Fourniret would kill the girl. Whatever the case, the incident seemed to solidify the relationship between the couple. In 1988, while pregnant, Olivier asked 20-year-old student Fabienne Leroy for help, saying she urgently needed to see a doctor. The sympathetic girl got into the car, and this time, Fourniret was behind the wheel. He drove the car into a field and forced the victim to get out at gunpoint. After Olivier checked the girl's virginity, Fourniret assaulted and killed Fabienne. Her body was found in a field the next day, and the couple continued to find victims and kill them following their established pattern. When their son Salem was born, the criminals didn't hesitate to use him as bait, telling girls they needed a doctor for the baby. Even if Olivier didn't always accompany her husband on his trips, he would always tell her about his exploits, claiming that he went hunting or saying, "I found satisfaction." In 2003, Fourniret made a mistake. A 13-year-old girl he abducted in Belgium managed to escape from his van when he stopped at a gas station. She chewed through the rope he used to tie her wrists. The girl was picked up by a passing motorist who noted down the van's license plate number. Fourniret was arrested, and in his car they found several hairs, one of which belonged to Manania Thumpong, a 13-year-old girl whose remains were found in a forest in 2001. Fourniret was not eager to cooperate with the investigation, but the police from at least 5 countries, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark, began reviewing cases of violence, abductions, and murders that remained unsolved and resembled Fourniret's crimes. In Denmark, the police noticed that the composite sketch of a suspect in a violent crime closely resembled Fourniret, while in the Netherlands, Fourniret started to be suspected in the disappearance of 2 girls. In 2004, the criminal finally confessed to kidnapping and killing victims during the 1980s and 1990s, admitting to abducting 9 girls and young women during that time. He is also suspected of 10 more murders, 9 in France and 1 in Belgium. In 2006, rumors circulated that Fourniret might be the true culprit in the case of Christian Ranucci. Christian, a 20-year-old man, was beheaded by the guillotine in France on July 28, 1976, after being suspected of killing 8-year-old Marie Dolores Rambler. This case had always been highly controversial. On June 3, 1974, Marie Dolores and her brother Jean met a young man driving a car, wearing a red sweater, who claimed he was looking for his lost dog. The man had asked the children to help him, and Jean ran to search for the dog, while Marie Dolores got into the man's car and was abducted. An hour after the girl's disappearance, Christian's car, a grey Peugeot 304, was involved in an accident and left the scene. Witnesses described the driver's appearance to the police, who immediately concluded a connection between the abduction and the fleeing motorist. After a search, Marie Dolores' body was found in the bushes, where she had been strangled to death. Ranucci was arrested due to the car accident and the fact that he was allegedly carrying a heavy package. Police found trousers with dried blood stains in his car, and the blood group on the trousers matched the girl's blood group. At first, Ranucci confessed to the murder and told the police where he had hidden the knife in the bushes. What was strange about this confession was that he only confessed to facts that the police had already established in the first 48 hours of the investigation. A day later, Ranucci denied his involvement in the crime. Allegedly, Ranucci's case was adjusted and physical evidence was hidden to match his confession. The bloodstains on the trousers turned out to be much older and were merely the result of the man falling off a motorcycle.
Moreover, Ranucci had the same blood group as the girl. An elderly couple who witnessed the incident claimed to have seen the girl on the backseat of Ranucci's car and heard her screaming. However, the credibility of this statement is questionable since the couple did not leave their own car, and the door of Ranucci's car was broken from the side opposite to where the pensioners claimed he had taken the girl out. Later, 5 more people claimed to have witnessed the abduction, and all of them described a man who looked nothing like Ranucci. 2 interesting points are worth noting. Firstly, Fourniret also drove a grey Peugeot 304, which from behind resembled a Simca 1100, a car described by 2 witnesses as the one the driver used to lure children inside on the day of Marie Dolores' abduction. The driver was wearing a red sweater, which was later found by investigators. As it turned out, the sweater found at the crime scene did not belong to Ranucci, as several sizes too small for an athletic-looking young man like him. Secondly, the most surprising discovery was a photograph taken by a photographer from a Marseille newspaper in March 1976 in the courtroom during Ranucci's trial. Among the visitors, there sat a man with glasses who suspiciously resembled Fourniret. Although the fact that Fourniret attended the trial was refuted, it is hard to deny that he is a much more suitable suspect in this case. For example, he went on vacation to Marseille in June 1974, driving a car of the same grey color and brand. At that time, he was 32 years old and, compared to Ranucci, already had a history of sexual crimes. Fourniret also frequently used the lost dog trick to lure young girls into his car. Additionally, no signs of violence were found on the child's body. Unfortunately for Ranucci, the media frenzy around the girl's murder made him a suspect even before the case went to trial. Immediately after his arrest, the press labeled him as the killer, and he was sentenced to death, becoming one of the last people executed in France. Why did the police begin to suspect that Michel Fourniret might be connected to the disappearance of Estelle Mouzin? 2 weeks before Estelle's disappearance, a 9-year-old girl was almost kidnapped by a man in a white van. The girl was able to describe the driver to the police, which led to the creation of a composite sketch of the suspect. When the police focused their efforts on Fourniret, who also drove a white van, they showed the girl a photo of him, hoping she would recognize him, but she didn't. Additionally, after his confession to the murders, Fourniret led the police to the burial site of one of his young victims. On the way there, he described the clothing the girl was wearing on the day of her abduction, which was similar to what Estelle was wearing on the day she disappeared, although the police believe this might be a mere coincidence. Sometime later, the police found photos of Estelle and recordings of television programs about the girl in Fourniret's house and on his computer. It's worth noting that 2 fragments of white shoelaces and black gloves were found with Fourniret, and Estelle was wearing white shoes and black gloves on the day of her disappearance. However, the police couldn't find any additional connections between the serial killer and the crime, and the hypothesis of Fourniret's involvement had to be discarded due to a lack of evidence. Moreover, he had an alibi. He claimed he made a phone call to his son from his home on the day the girl disappeared. Although there was no certainty that Fourniret actually made that call, the police believed he was not lying. Psychologists were also confident that Fourniret was not involved in the case because Estelle was too young for him. The 3 girls he confessed to murdering were 12 and 13 years old. His accomplice and wife, Monique Olivier, told the police that once when they were watching a TV program accusing Fourniret of killing Estelle, he laughed and said it wasn't him. In May 2010, the Mouzin family's lawyer requested a new investigation into Fourniret's involvement. In 2013, he was declared innocent after several hair analyses from his van, conducted when he was arrested in 2003, did not match Estelle's DNA. As for the second suspect in Estelle Mouzin's kidnapping, Nordal Lelandais, the police were interested in him in connection with 3 different crimes. He was the main suspect in the murder of Arthur Noyer, a soldier who disappeared in April and whose skull was found in September. He was also the main suspect in the case of the disappearance of Maëlys de Araujo, a 9-year-old girl who was kidnapped from a wedding on August 27, 2017. 9-year-old Melis Duval was last seen on the night of August 27, 2017, at a wedding to which she was invited with her parents. At the event, the children were playing separately from the adult celebration. Around 3 a.m., her absence was noticed, and her search began initially without police involvement. A witness at the wedding recalled, the DJ of the evening announced over the microphone that a child was missing. Suddenly, everyone started searching in the main hall and outside. It was terrible. To witness the disappearance of a 9-year-old girl, it's very serious. At first, we thought she fell asleep somewhere after playing hide and seek. An hour later, when she wasn't found, the police were called. The arriving police initiated the search for the child using search dogs and also explored the area with helicopters. All 180 guests invited to the wedding were interviewed. Almost immediately, investigators noticed inconsistencies in the statements of Nordal Lelandais, a friend of the groom. A week into the investigation, after crime scene analysts found DNA belonging to the girl on the dashboard of Lelandais' car, he was charged with her kidnapping. From that moment, Lelandais remained silent, refusing to assist the investigation, and claimed that even though the girl might have been in his car, it didn't prove his guilt. As the police conducted their investigation into the child's disappearance, they discovered other clues pointing to Lelandais' involvement. In particular, a surveillance camera captured a car belonging to the man leaving the wedding venue with a small figure on the passenger seat shortly before the girl's disappearance was reported. The blurry silhouette was wearing a white dress, similar to what Melis was wearing. The parents recognized elements of the dress, especially the child's ribbon, said their lawyer, Fabian Rajon. Additionally, Lelandais' phone was in airplane mode around the time of the girl's disappearance, and it turned back on 39 minutes later when he returned to the celebration alone. It was also established that the next day, Lelandais spent several hours cleaning his car with powerful cleaning products. He claimed he did it to prepare the car for sale. Lelandais' defense initially disputed the timeline provided by the prosecution. His lawyer confirmed that while traces of the girl's DNA were found on his car's dashboard, his client completely denied kidnapping her. He stated that several DNA traces were found on the dashboard, and someone who had contact with the child could have transferred her DNA into the car. He also speculated that children could have gotten into the car without the driver's knowledge, noting that the windows were open during the celebration. After 6 months of investigation, Lelandais was forced to change his statements when Melis' blood was found in the trunk of his car. He confessed to killing the girl and apologized to her parents. Earlier, he had admitted that she was in his car on the night of her disappearance but claimed not to know anything about her subsequent fate. Now, he admitted that he unintentionally killed the child. The prosecutor from Grenoble, Jean-Yves Coquelet, stated that Lelandais led investigators to the location near his parents' home in Domessine, Savoie Department, where the body was found. The search for the remains of the young girl took an entire day and was complicated by snow and rough terrain. Some of the girl's remains were found by the investigators and search dogs. The prosecutor from Grenoble said that Melis' parents are no longer in the dark, adding that they know their daughter is dead, that she was killed, and that a few minutes ago they were told that the child's remains were found. This is a horrific conclusion to the case, the culmination of 6 months of investigation and search, he added. The girl's mother addressed Lelandais through a Facebook message. We had to wait 5.5 months for this monster to finally speak. Melis will haunt you day and night in your cell, she wrote, grieving. My little angel, I couldn't protect you from this predator, and I will blame myself for that for a long time. Nordal Lelandais, a former military dog handler who was also charged with the murder of a young soldier, claims that he killed Melis Duval by mistake but refused to provide details of what happened. Post-mortem examination showed that the girl had a broken jaw, likely from a strong blow to the face. The prosecutors handling Melis' case suspect Lelandais to be a serial killer. On December 21, 2017, he was charged with the murder of Arthur Noyer, a 23-year-old soldier who disappeared without a trace during a hike on April 12, 2017. The soldier's relatives admitted that they also hoped to learn the truth about his death. Arthur was last seen early in the morning on April 12, 2017, as he left a nightclub to go on a hike in Chambéry. Pieces of his skull were found on a hiking trail in the municipality of Montmelian, near Chambéry, in September. The phone company recorded Leland Day's phone in the same area at the time of the soldier's disappearance. Leland Day's Audi A3 was also spotted by surveillance cameras in the Chambéry area. During the investigation, police also searched his computer and phone, and it was revealed that 2 weeks after the soldier's disappearance, Leland Days entered the search query human body dismemberment. Over time, Leland Days confessed to investigators that he gave the soldier a ride but denied any involvement in his death before finally admitting to the murder on March 29, 2018. There are also suspicions that Leland Days may be responsible for the unsolved murder of 3 people in the Alps when a British man, his wife, and his mother-in-law were killed in a car park in a wooded area in September 2012. Other cases in which Leland Days may be involved include the disappearance of Adrian Murel, a 24-year-old Belgian man who went missing near Lake Annecy in July, and Jean-Christophe Morin and Ahmed Hamad, who disappeared in 2011 and 2012, respectively. Leland Days' alleged connections to these murders led the police to start reviewing other cases of missing people in the region as they feared he might be a serial killer. The police investigated his possible involvement in at least 10 other crimes. While investigating other potential crimes, Leland Day's connection to the case of Estelle Mouzin came to light. Mayli's disappearance bore similarities to Estelle's case, as the girls were about the same age, and both vanished without a trace, with no witnesses to the abductions. Recognizing this similarity, Estelle's family requested to determine Leland Day's whereabouts at the time of their daughter's disappearance. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, it turned out that he was serving in the military in the Marne department, 150 kilometers away from where Estelle disappeared. Thus, law enforcement had to dismiss him as a second prospective suspect in Estelle Mouzin's abduction case. Over the course of several years while the search for Estelle was ongoing, other potential leads were discovered, which ultimately led nowhere. For instance, a real shock for the girl's family was the appearance of a photo allegedly of Estelle, which was taken from a website containing indecent images of children. Her father confessed how upset he was by the appearance of such a photo, but it turned out not to be his daughter. The girl in the photo appeared older than Estelle, and the image was taken several years before her disappearance. The police had no new leads, and the chances of finding Estelle were diminishing before their eyes. But then thunder struck on January 24, 2020, when Monique Olivier, the former wife of Michel Fourniret, claimed that her ex-husband killed Estelle Mouzin. On March 6, 2020, her statements were confirmed by Michel Fourniret himself. For years, Michel Fourniret denied any involvement in the girl's disappearance. However, 16.5 years later, on November 27, 2019, Michel Fourniret, a serial killer and predator of minors who was already serving a life sentence, became the primary suspect once again. He was charged with abduction and forced confinement, which ended in death. On January 24, 2020, Monique Olivier confirmed to Judge Sabine Keris that it was indeed her who made the phone call from their home to Fourniret's son on January 9, 2003, the day of the girl's disappearance. Not stopping there, she continued to narrate that the girl represented the type of victim her husband was seeking, and she was not too young for him as psychologists once claimed. She admitted that a few days before the abduction, her husband had been driving around the region and returned one evening, announcing that he had spotted a beautiful little target, as he put it. Responding to questions from the investigating judge after his alibi collapsed due to his former wife's confession, Fourniret finally confirmed that he abducted and killed the girl. However, the elderly Fourniret claimed during the hearing that he suffers from memory loss and was not formally charged. "It is very likely, even very, very likely, that I was the author of that disappearance," Fourniret said, asserting that nothing clicked in his head when he was shown a picture of the girl. "Since I cannot say for sure that I am responsible for her disappearance, I call on you to consider me as guilty," he added. Fonire, 78 years old according to media reports, is suffering from the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, experiencing moments of absence, but has generally understood everything, according to Didier Sabin, the lawyer of Estelle's father. To corroborate Fonire's statements, Monique Olivier was questioned again, and she confirmed that her husband did indeed abduct and kill Estelle Mouzin. Although Fonire confessed to the girl's murder, he refused or was unable to reveal the location where he hid her body. He only mentioned that she might be on the property of one of his houses in the Ardennes. Forensics began the grim search for the girl's remains on Monday, June 22, 2020. Experts sealed off Fonire's former home in northern France, more than 200 kilometers from where Estelle was abducted on her way home from school. The police also cordoned off another former residence of Fonire in Chateau de Sautou, where the remains of other victims of the killer, a 12-year-old girl and a 22-year-old woman, were found in 2004. Unfortunately, they did not find Estelle's body. "We can report some progress, but some doors have been closed forever, places we can now discard," said one of the lawyers representing the Mouzin family. Even before Fonire's confession to Estelle's murder, the serial killer, nicknamed the Monster of the Ardennes, as well as the Virginity Hunter, had been sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His accomplice, Monique Olivier, also received a life sentence with the possibility of parole only after 28 years. The criminal world of Liverpool was seriously shaken. 3 guys broke into a father and son's house and made off with a 30-kilogram stash of prohibited substances. The robbery sent shockwaves through the city's underworld. The gang that owned the stolen batch was once considered untouchable. A secret informant reported that the guys who lost goods worth £1 million were at the top of the city's criminal hierarchy. No one could believe that someone would dare to steal from them. Police managed to crack the case by gaining access to their phones, and in May 2022, some of them found themselves behind bars. However, Liverpool's gangs were still furious and tried to get to anyone they believed was involved in the heist. Rumors circulated that 35-year-old Joseph Nee had been gathering information for them. Joseph Nee had only recently been released from prison, where he served time for drug distribution and robbery. He was granted early release and was required to comply with parole conditions. Nee was part of a gang that trafficked Class A controlled substances into Liverpool, the most dangerous of them all. Joseph wasn't considered the most popular guy even within his criminal circle, and some had even targeted him before because even his own associates viewed him as an informant and a snitch. On August 22, 2022, Joseph and his friends gathered at a mutual acquaintance's house to watch a football match between Liverpool and United. The game ended at 21:52, and shortly after, Joseph left the house with one of his friends, Paul Abraham. Later, Paul would recount that they were simply walking down the street when, at 21:59, they heard 3 loud pops. Of course, they had heard such sounds before and instantly recognized them as gunshots. The men started running. The shooter circled around and began firing at the men from behind at close range. The attacker was very close to his target and, of course, knew how to handle a firearm. As a result, the bullet struck Joseph in the upper abdomen, and he fell immediately. Paul Abraham leaped over his fallen wounded friend and sprinted towards the park gates. It might not have been the noblest behavior towards a friend, but perhaps he knew that it wasn't worth risking his life for Joseph. At that moment, the armed man was in a perfect position, unlike his victim. Joseph lay unarmed, wounded and defenseless on the ground, while the stranger, dressed in black and wearing a balaclava, confidently approached him, holding a 9mm pistol. Joseph begged for mercy, but the stranger paid no attention to his pleas and coldly squeezed the trigger. The shot could only have been lethal, but obviously the universe was on Joseph's side at that moment. As they say, the gun jammed and it didn't fire. Joseph didn't miss this chance to jump up and, despite his wound, run away. Surprisingly, the shooter was prepared for any turn of events. He calmly retrieved 2 weapons, a revolver, and continued the pursuit, never ceasing to fire. Meanwhile, Joseph was running in the direction of King's Hit Avenue, an ordinary street where ordinary families lived. This was the home of 46-year-old Cheryl Corbell and her 3 children, Chloe, Ryan, and their younger sister, 9-year-old Olivia, who everyone called Liv. Of course, all the residents on the street who were at home heard that there was some commotion outside. Some realized that these were gunshots, while others were puzzled about what was happening. Among them was Cheryl. The woman opened the door and looked out onto the street, as many would have done in her place. However, Joseph noticed the light in the partially open door, and he ran as fast as he could toward Cheryl's house. The woman was horrified to see an injured man approaching her, followed by an armed man in a mask. Quickly assessing the situation and realizing that it was not worth getting involved in the gang's altercation, she rushed back into the house and tried to slam the door. Unfortunately, the dropped latch prevented her from doing so. Joseph, desperate to escape and knowing that his time was running out because his pursuer was about to catch up with him, pounded on the door, begging the homeowner for help. Cheryl had already realized that these were some criminal gang troubles, and being a Liverpool resident, she understood that she and her family would face trouble if she got involved in something like this. So, she ordered the man to leave. She must have felt sorry for the wounded man, but her desire to protect her own children outweighed everything else. However, Joseph had no intention of leaving. He threw himself against the door with all his weight, breaking inside, knowing that this would bring enormous problems to the family. The man burst inside and collapsed on the floor, weakened from the chase and the gunshot wound. But the pursuer didn't back down. He saw Joseph Nee enter the house. Another person might have thought that there would always be another day, another opportunity to reach the target. But the shooter had no intention of giving up. He had a mission to accomplish, regardless of who he harmed. The commotion near the front door of the house, which had now shifted into the hallway, was accompanied by noise. Chloe, Ryan, and Olivia were sleeping, but they woke up due to the loud sounds. Ryan recalls that he was in his room when he heard 3 loud noises followed by quick footsteps. It was his younger sister, Olivia, running downstairs crying out, "Mom, I'm scared!" Ryan also came out of his room but stayed at the top of the stairs, watching in bewilderment as chaos unfolded below. He looked down and wondered who this man lying in the hallway was. He saw his mother trying to close the door, and his younger sister stood just a few steps away from the front door. Olivia wanted to be closer to her mother. She went down to her, crying, "Mom, I'm scared! Mom, I'm scared!" The assailant at this moment could not ignore the child's cries. He knew that Joseph Nee had burst into the home of an ordinary family with no connection to their disputes. He saw Cheryl trying to eject the stranger from the house, saw Joseph attempting to get inside, and heard Olivia's cries. However, none of this mattered to him because he simply started shooting through the gap in the door without thinking about where the bullets might hit. A bullet struck Cheryl, entering her right hand. But even though she was in pain, she continued to battle with the door. Joseph, at this moment, regained his senses to the point where he began to help her. He shouted at her to call the police because the shooter was still trying to force his way in. The shooter managed to push his hand with the revolver through the gap in the door. While Joseph began to plead with him to stop again, Cheryl jammed the door, including his hand with the weapon, before he began shooting once more. A bullet hit the door frame. Finally, the shooter decided he had spent too much time and retreated. Cheryl was able to breathe a sigh of relief, stopped struggling with the door, and rushed to comfort her daughter. She wasn't concerned about her own wound. The most important thing was to hug Olivia and tell her that everything would be okay, that no one would harm her now. Cheryl noticed that there was a lot of blood on Olivia's pajamas and thought that her wound on her arm was bleeding heavily. But then she lifted her daughter's shirt and realized that it wasn't her blood. Olivia had been shot. The same bullet that had injured Cheryl had gone through her right hand and into Olivia's chest. Olivia was gasping for air. Her mother knelt beside her, begging her daughter to stay with her. Ryan, who still hadn't realized that his sister was wounded, began shouting at Joseph to get out, but the uninvited guest had no intention of staying. Joseph managed to make a call and was picked up by his 2 friends in an SUV. They rushed him to the hospital, not giving a second thought to the condition they left the family members in, whose lives had just been forever changed. They simply abandoned them amidst all the chaos. While Cheryl called for help, she held Olivia in her arms and instructed her son to continuously apply pressure to the wound on Olivia's chest. Only then did the boy realize that his sister was injured. Olivia's lips had turned blue, and the bleeding had stopped. Ryan assisted his mother in carrying Olivia upstairs. They tried to stop the bleeding with towels. A neighbor arrived attempting to offer some assistance. Cheryl desperately tried to keep Olivia conscious. Later, she would tell the police that at some point, Olivia's body went limp and her eyes rolled upwards. It was at that moment that Cheryl realized Olivia had passed away. The police arrived at 10:10 p.m. An officer felt Olivia's faint heartbeat, and they carried her out of the house, rushing her to the nearest children's hospital in an ambulance. They held on to hope, but the doctors were unable to do anything. Olivia was pronounced dead at 11:24 p.m. Cheryl wasn't by her side when she passed, as she was receiving medical attention herself. Just a few hours earlier, it had been a normal, happy family, and now a mother and son were left as witnesses to the death of their 9-year-old daughter and sister. Meanwhile, a man named Thomas Cashman, known as Tommy, dressed in black but without the balaclava, rushed to the home of his former lover with whom he had a very brief affair. He entered her house without permission, scaring her terribly as he entered her bedroom. He was agitated and claimed that someone had tried to kill him, and he wanted to kill that person in return. In other words, he needed her help, and he was willing to say anything to get it. He even stated that she was the only one he could trust, despite having a fiancée with whom he had spent many years. The woman believed Tommy and offered him shelter for the night. However, the next morning, when all the media were buzzing about the shocking crime, she realized that Tommy had been involved in the shootout and was responsible for the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel. Now, involuntarily, she became an accomplice. The woman was horrified by this prospect. On one hand, she didn't want to cover up a child killer, but on the other hand, any Liverpool resident knows how dangerous it can be to cross paths with criminal gangs. Uncertain about what to do, she called her boyfriend, Paul Russell. Paul arrived and had a private conversation with Tommy. Tommy immediately confessed to Paul that he had been hunting Joseph, but was abruptly cut off by Joseph, who asked him not to say anything about it to avoid implicating him in the crime. It was a very reasonable move on Joseph's part. What remains unclear is why he later made a significant mistake, giving Tommy different clothes, helping him get rid of the items he was wearing, and taking him to where his car was parked. Perhaps Paul understood that Tommy could pose a threat to him or his girlfriend and chose to assist him. But this act of help to a killer will likely have serious consequences for Paul as well. During this period, the investigation into the murder was in progress. Joseph Nee, who had suffered injuries, much like Cheryl and Olivia, declined to cooperate with the police. His primary concern was self-preservation, as the looming threat of returning to prison for violating his parole weighed heavily on him. Despite being involved in the criminal underworld, Joseph should have been able to surmise the identity of his assailant and whose orders the killer was following. Nevertheless, he informed the officers that anyone could have taken a shot at him that night. It's noteworthy that Joseph was not the only one apprehensive about engaging with law enforcement. Olivia had become the third Liverpool resident to succumb to gunshot wounds within a week, not to mention the numerous incidents where victims were shot but survived. In a city aptly nicknamed the British Amsterdam, crossing paths with criminal gangs was indeed perilous. A reward for information on Olivia's assailant had been announced, which quickly swelled to a record-high amount of £200,000, thanks to an anonymous contributor who added £100,000 to the fund. However, despite this substantial incentive, no one came forward with information. Nonetheless, the police succeeded in identifying a suspect, 34-year-old Thomas Cashman. He was a father of two, aged 4 and 14, engaged to a girl he had been dating since their school days. The family resided in a spacious suburban house in West Derby. Tommy had previously worked at a car wash, but his current lifestyle was vastly different. Officially unemployed, he rented a house that, in reality, belonged to the gang's leader. It was evident that his involvement in criminal activities afforded him a lavish life. Fortunately, Liverpool boasted extensive CCTV coverage, making it challenging to perpetrate an attack without being captured on camera. Investigation revealed that at 8:30 p.m., Tommy returned home, swiftly changed into black attire, and left his residence. He didn't make much effort to conceal himself while hunting his target. Surveillance footage documented him passing the house on Finch Lane several times before traversing past it once more. Tommy was convinced that his target was inside that house, having closely monitored his movements. He had even attempted to attack him earlier that day, though that endeavor had failed. When Joseph finally left the house, Tommy was resolute in his intent to eliminate him. However, fate took a different course, and an innocent bystander fell victim to a stray bullet. Such are the consequences when the worlds of ordinary individuals and criminals collide. Tommy's trousers, which he had provided to Paul Russell, were discovered at his sister's residence bearing his DNA. Gunpowder residue was also found on his right leg. Video evidence, DNA profiling, and gunpowder residue collectively linked him to the attack on Joseph.
Yet the investigation had another valuable asset, a courageous witness who risked his life to oppose Liverpool's criminal underworld.
In the early hours of September 4th, 2022, Tommy was apprehended while hiding at a friend's apartment. In October 2022, Tommy was formally charged with Olivia's murder, the attempted murder of Joseph and Cheryl, as well as possession of a firearm. Paul Russell faced charges of aiding and abetting, despite his earnest efforts to distance himself from the case. The trial of Tommy took place in Manchester in March 2023. Tommy denied all allegations. He claimed he hadn't killed anyone and that he appeared on the video because he was a local drug dealer making deliveries that day and buying toys for his sick child. He added that he had no intention of killing anyone that day and that he had been friends with Joseph Nee for the past 10 years. However, his words were completely contradicted by a key prosecution witness. The remarkable effect came when Tommy's former girlfriend, who had sheltered him immediately after the crime, appeared in court. It was an incredibly brave move on her part, considering she lived in a city where many of Tommy's friends and gang members resided. Naturally, she would be protected under a witness protection program. As the police stated, she received more threats of violence than any other witness in Merseyside police history. She had to completely abandon her previous life, yet she chose to do the right thing. The witness explained her decision by saying that one should not be afraid to come forward when it involves the murder of a 9-year-old Olivia. The witness described how the accused came to her after the murder, trying to secure her support to create a false alibi. It's unclear why he couldn't ask his own fiancée for this favor. Tommy's defense team attempted to twist her words, suggesting that she wanted to frame her former lover because he refused to leave his fiancée for her. It was an absurd attempt to discredit the witness, and despite their efforts, she remained highly convincing. Following the witness's example, other people also found the courage to approach the police. They revealed that within criminal circles, Tommy was known as a contract killer or a hitman. He had been hired for various murders and was suspected in other homicide cases and assassination attempts, including another attempt on Joseph Nee's life with the same weapon used to kill Olivia on that fateful day. In fact, the same weapon had been used on January 27, 2020, when a 19-year-old was shot. It was evident that Tommy had hired a criminal cartel to assassinate Joseph Nee. On March 30th, after 3.5 weeks of court proceedings, the jury unanimously found Thomas Cashman guilty on all counts. The sentencing was scheduled for April 3rd. On the same day, Olivia's family intended to address the court, speaking to the murderer and recounting how the crime he committed had affected their entire family. However, Tommy refused to even appear in court on that day. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole at a minimum of 42 years, making him 76 years old upon potential release. The judge commented on her decision, explaining that she would have preferred to sentence him to life without parole. However, she had to acknowledge the fact that Tommy didn't intend to kill Olivia. If he had intended to kill a child, he would have received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It was evident to everyone in court that his target was another criminal. The judge took into consideration that he was also a father and wouldn't be able to see his children as often as he would have liked, but that was solely his own fault. She emphasized that the man's refusal to appear in court was not taken into account. Paul Russell was also found guilty of aiding and abetting and is currently in prison awaiting his sentence. Olivia's mother, Cheryl, had hoped to look the killer in the eyes and express her thoughts about him. However, he deprived her of this opportunity by not appearing in court. Cheryl admits that she didn't know he could simply choose not to come. Therefore, Olivia's family, particularly Cheryl and Olivia's Aunt Antonia, are advocating for changes in the law to require criminals to appear in court during sentencing and meet face-to-face with the victims' families. Since Olivia's murder, not much time has passed, and her mother admits that during these few months, she has been driven to madness by the deafening silence in their home. Olivia, from her childhood, was a chatterbox and giggler. If Olivia had survived in just 5 days, she would have performed a truly noble act. She intended to donate her hair to a charitable organization. She was eager to help an organization that makes wigs for sick children and had decided to cut off a whole 12 inches of her locks. People would have understood what a tremendous gesture it was coming from a 9-year-old girl. Giving a piece of herself to another child who needed it more would have shown just how wonderful Olivia was. The complete opposite of the people who invaded her home that August night in 2022 when Olivia took a bullet meant for a criminal. In memory of Olivia, other children created a beautiful corner in the park where she loved to play. They painted an enormous butterfly on the wall and planted flowers of a beautiful pink color. During Olivia's farewell at the church, hundreds of people gathered. Everything was adorned with pink butterflies. Olivia's mother, Cheryl, bid a moving farewell to her daughter, saying that Liv was loved and adored by everyone who knew her. She will never be forgotten. Cheryl added, "I won't say goodbye, but I'll say goodnight. I love you. We'll see you in the morning." In 1994, in the small town of New Haven in the state of New York, 18-year-old Heidi Allen was abducted from the store where she worked. 2 brothers were accused of her kidnapping, but 2 separate trials led to paradoxical outcomes. All charges were dropped against one brother, while the other was found guilty. However, if you thought, well, at least they caught the guy who did it, by the end of this story, you'll likely change your opinion. On April 3, 1994, Easter Sunday, 18-year-old Heidi Allen began her shift at the convenience store attached to the D&W gas station in New Haven, a town in Oswego County, New York. Heidi was a determined and energetic young woman with ambitions of building a career in education or psychological counseling. Devoting much of her time to sports, her tall and robust build made her an invaluable member of volleyball and other teams. Despite her athletic prowess, she maintained a friendly demeanor, and everyone noted her warmth and responsiveness. Heidi had been working at D&W for over 2 years. It was her day off, but she agreed to cover a shift so that her colleague could spend the day with her children. Heidi's shift began at 5:45, and she arrived at work with her boyfriend. This was not unusual, as he often accompanied her to ensure she felt safe while opening the store very early in the morning. Typically, he would wait until the first customers arrived and then go about his day. That's exactly how it played out on April 3rd. Another customer entered the store but didn't see any staff. It might have seemed like the store was closed, but the gas pumps were operational and the lights were on inside. The customer went outside and flagged down a passing patrol car. Sheriff's deputies entered the store, finding everything seemingly in order. There was money in the cash register, and $9.50 was on the counter, left by another customer as payment for fuel and a newspaper. There were no signs of struggle or apparent issues. A security alarm was located under the counter, but it hadn't triggered that day. The officers discovered Heidi's car parked on the street, and her purse and car keys were still in the store. Despite the absence of signs of a struggle, the sheriff's deputies concluded that she might have been abducted, and the search for her began immediately. The state police offered assistance to the sheriff's office in Oswego County with the search for the missing girl. They had the resources to block all exits and ensure the abductor wouldn't escape. However, the sheriff inexplicably declined the offer, stating that his team could handle it on their own. Officers checked the punched receipts at the store's cash register and discovered that the last purchase was made at 7:42 when someone bought 2 packs of cigarettes. It was crucial to find this customer, as they were the last person to see the girl at work. Fortunately, the search for this individual didn't take much time. As soon as the news of Heidi's presumed abduction spread through the town, a man named Richard Thibodeau called the police. He claimed to be the one who was in the store that morning. The girl sold him cigarettes, and he left afterward. When extensive searches for the girl began, local residents, including Richard Thibodeau, his brother Gary, and his wife Teresa, joined in. Around the same time, Christopher Bivens contacted the police, describing how he drove past the store and saw 2 men leading a tall young woman toward a van. He thought one of the men was holding the woman tightly. He admitted he didn't remember the appearance of the van or the men, but noted that they were quite tall. Despite Richard Thibodeau voluntarily contacting the police and assisting in the search for the girl, law enforcement grew suspicious of him due to the timing of his purchase, just minutes before the concerned customer approached the sheriff's deputies. Additionally, he drove a van similar to the one described by Christopher. The police searched Richard's van, but nothing connecting the vehicle or its owner to Heidi was found. Richard willingly provided his fingerprints, blood samples, and hair without objection. Due to suspicions surrounding Richard, investigators turned a closer eye to his brother, Gary Thibodeau. After all, Christopher Bivens saw two men taking the young woman out of the store. Gary explained to detectives that he was still sleeping at home that early morning, and his girlfriend confirmed his alibi. A month later, the police charged Richard Thibodeau with the abduction. Gary was also taken into custody, albeit for a different minor offense unrelated to Heidi's disappearance. While he was in jail, law enforcement managed to build a case against the brothers. Suddenly, two inmates emerged, claiming that Gary had said Heidi was no more and she would never be found. Thus, detectives arrested a man who had voluntarily called the police and reported being in the store that morning. Despite no evidence against him, Richard willingly provided all the necessary samples and underwent a polygraph test. However, it seemed to have little significance. Richard and his brother Gary, a person with an alibi, were charged with first-degree kidnapping. A jury trial was conducted separately for Gary Thibodeau. During the trial, no concrete evidence or forensic testimony was presented, and Heidi was still missing. However, the prosecution was confident in their case. They called a witness who had seen two men with a girl near the store that morning, and jury members heard the statements of two inmates regarding Gary's alleged remarks about Heidi. Although the information provided by the two convicted individuals contradicted not only each other, but also established facts at that time, they were allowed to testify in court. The jurors heard that Heidi disappeared within just 13 minutes between the last recorded cigarette sale and the arrival of sheriff's deputies at the store. During these 13 minutes, the witness saw two men leading the young woman to a car. He described the vehicle as a white van with two dark blue or black doors at the back and two doors of the same color on the right side, along with a wide 6-inch black stripe above the wheels. The same witness, Christopher Bivens, identified the van as the one driven by Richard. However, it's crucial to note the interesting evolution in the testimony of this key prosecution witness. Initially, he could hardly recall anything about the men or the van where Heidi was supposedly placed. Suddenly, he could remember minute details, and the height of the men decreased to match the Thibodeau brothers' heights. Another customer from the store was called to testify. He made a purchase at 7:41, just a minute before Richard bought 2 packs of cigarettes. The man explained that there was a running van in the parking lot, and he assumed it was Richard's. He saw Richard in the store and, for some reason, believed there were 2 men in the van. Essentially, his testimony merely confirmed that Richard Thibodeau was in the store, a fact that Richard did not deny. A 13-year-old girl also provided testimony, claiming to have seen Richard's van parked at Gary's house shortly after Heidi Allen's disappearance. The girl insisted she remembered this because it was Easter Sunday. She had just woken up and looked out the window to see the van. However, after the trial, she recanted her statements, admitting that it could have been a dream. This constituted the evidence presented by the sheriff's deputies. The prosecutors had no concrete evidence linking the Thibodeau brothers to the abduction, no motive for the crime, and no logical explanation for why Richard Thibodeau would buy cigarettes if he intended to abduct the girl. Why not simply pocket the cigarettes when he and his brother allegedly took Heidi out of the store? Despite all this, Gary Thibodeau was found guilty of first-degree kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 25 years before being eligible for parole. During Richard's trial, nearly all the same evidence was presented, except for the testimony of the 2 inmates. However, since a different judge presided over the case, and there were different jurors, the outcome of the trial turned out to be entirely different. All charges against Richard were dropped. Richard returned to his family, while Gary began serving his sentence in prison. Gradually, the case of Heidi Allen's abduction began to fade from memory until an unexpected turn occurred in February 2013. A woman named Tanya Priest called the police, claiming she needed to unburden her conscience. She recounted a conversation that took place in 2006 when she gave a ride to her friend Victoria West to the trailer home where she lived with her boyfriend James Steen. The couple invited her inside, and as they chatted about random topics, a news segment about Heidi aired on TV. The girls started discussing what might have happened to her when James suddenly said, "Do you really want to know?" and began his story. It was the last thing the girls expected to hear. Steen revealed that he, along with 2 friends, Roger Breckenridge and Michael Borer, had abducted Heidi that day, taking her out of the store and putting her into Michael Borer's van. Borer was waiting in the van, meaning that 2 men took the girl out of the store, just as witness Christopher Bivens had claimed. The men then drove Heidi to the trailer home of Breckenridge's girlfriend, Jennifer Westcott, on Rice Road in the town of Mexico, Oswego County. Steen added that they had long gotten rid of that van, but the body could still be found in a shed in the woods across from where the trailer had been located. When asked why they had committed such a grave act, Steen explained that Heidi was planning to report to the police their involvement in illegal drug trafficking. At first, the friends didn't believe Steen, thinking he wouldn't harm a fly. However, a few years later, when Steen killed his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend, who happened to be his cousin, out of jealousy, Tanya Priest was no longer sure that Steen was so harmless. Interestingly, the police initially hesitated to believe Tanya Priest's words, but she was determined not to give up, and the officers eventually yielded to her persistent requests to investigate this version. They assisted Tanya in secretly recording a phone conversation with Roger Breckenridge's ex-girlfriend, Jennifer Westcott. In the phone conversation, Westcott admitted knowing about what happened to Heidi Allen and went so far as to say that the men didn't bring the abducted girl into her trailer, but left her in the van. However, when sheriff's deputies questioned Jennifer and presented her with the recording, she evaded and claimed she just wanted to quickly end the conversation with Tanya, agreeing with everything she said. During a polygraph test, she lied about knowing who abducted Heidi Allen. Despite this information, law enforcement did not actively pursue the case. At this point, Tanya reached out to Gary Thibodeau's lawyer because by then, she was convinced of his innocence and wanted to help him secure his release. It's worth noting that the main problem in this case has always been the motive behind the crime. It's entirely unclear why the Thibodeau brothers would kidnap a girl they barely knew. Similarly, the motive for three men to take such a heavy burden upon themselves remains unclear. However, it turns out that such a motive could exist, and law enforcement authorities did not want the truth to come to light. Heidi Allen, an 18-year-old employee at the gas station convenience store, had been a police informant for 3 years. 3 years ago, the girl got into trouble when she was caught by the police during a party her sister wanted to attend. As she was a minor and had put a child who was with her in the car in a dangerous situation, Heidi faced significant problems. In exchange for dropping all charges, the 15-year-old girl made a deal and became a police informant. Although she was a confidential informant, her status was revealed by a bizarre accident. Before she disappeared, Heidi worked with a sheriff's assistant, Chris Van Patten, who accidentally dropped her informant card with a photo and the codename Julia Roberts near the store where she worked. The card was found by Heidi's colleague, Kristen Duval, who returned it to the police. Kristen claimed that she only told her mother about it, but even if the girl told the truth, it is unknown how long the card lay on the ground and how many bystanders could see it. Inmates who testified in court against Gary Thibodeau claimed that Heidi was worried about Gary because he was planning to involve her in illegal dealings with controlled substances. However, firstly, one of these inmates later recanted his statement. Secondly, Heidi's diary was found where she detailed her life, and there was not a single mention of the Thibodeau brothers. Thirdly, the information that Heidi was, in fact, an informant allows for the dismissal of these baseless insinuations. The newly revealed information provided an alternative theory about Heidi's abduction, especially considering that her status was compromised, and dangerous people could have learned that she worked for the police. Considering the new details, in 2014, after persistent demands from Gary's lawyers, searches were conducted in 2 cabins in the woods. One was literally opposite the place where Jennifer Westcott lived. Search dogs indicated the potential presence of remains near the cabin. Police found fresh shoe tracks at the site, and inside it was evident that someone had already dismantled the floorboards. However, the forensic examination conducted by the Bureau of Forensic Services did not detect any human remains. It's interesting that when Tanya Priest decided to share what she knew, numerous witnesses from the town immediately came forward, claiming to have heard James Steen, Michael Borer, and Roger Breckenridge boasting about Heidi's abduction. Some of these witnesses asserted that they had reported this to the police on multiple occasions. Even the key prosecution witness, Christopher Bivens, stated that Steen and Breckenridge looked much more like the individuals leading the girl out of the store. However, as he had never seen their photos before, he considered the Tibbet brothers as possible abductors. Around the same time, it was revealed that in 2004, Heidi's cousin, Melissa Searles, found an envelope in her mailbox containing a gold bracelet she had once gifted to Heidi. The envelope had no postage stamp. indicating that it wasn't sent through the mail, but was personally placed in the mailbox. Melissa claimed that she had not reported this discovery to the police for years because the entire family believed Heidi's abductor was already in prison, and there was no need to reopen the case. However, with the new abduction theory, she apparently felt compelled to share this information. In 2015, the appeal process regarding Gary's accusation began. The defense insisted on a new trial due to a wealth of newly revealed information. 52 witnesses, including 3 considered potential new suspects, testified. A key witness was a woman who drove past the D&W store around 6 a.m. on April 3, 1994. She reported seeing an old, rust-covered van with no black stripe down the middle, confirming that it wasn't Richard Thibodeau's van. The defense tried to argue that the 3 men kidnapped the girl, forcing her into Michael Bohr's van, and took her to a cabin in the woods because they feared she would report them to the police. The men, of course, denied everything, but Michael Bohr slipped up by mentioning seeing Heidi's informant card near the store. Furthermore, Bohr told law enforcement that he wasn't a cruel person, so he couldn't have committed such a crime. However, this was untrue. Michael Bohr had previously been accused of kidnapping a young girl, making him, unlike the Thibodeau brothers, capable of such a crime. What's intriguing is that he was obsessed with this case, collecting a whole box of materials related to Heidi's abduction. One entry in his notes was particularly intriguing. He wrote as if a psychic told him that Heidi hid the bracelet behind the car seat. She added that Heidi hid an item where she was held, and all her family members would recognize it. Despite the abundance of new information, Gary lost the appeal after a year of hearings, and he was denied the opportunity for a new trial. From 2015 to 2018, subsequent judicial decisions also prohibited presenting new evidence due to doubts about the reliability of witnesses and the lack of sufficient proof to substantiate the alleged confessions of the 3 men. None of the 3, James Stein, Michael Bohr, or Roger Breckenridge, were charged in connection with Heidi's disappearance. Perhaps if Gary's lawyers had known about another crucial lead, they might have persuaded the judge to allow a new trial. The prosecutor informed the defense that he had provided them with all case materials. However, on December 13, 1994, he explicitly prohibited copying documents from a specific folder for the defense attorneys. Inside were 2 letters from the globally renowned expert in determining truthfulness, Murray Myron. His services were often sought by FBI agents, and he was asked to speak with a witness who might be the one who saw Heidi after her abduction. The expert concluded that Brent Moore's account of specific events related to Heidi was truthful and accurate. He did witness her being transported in a van, and she found refuge in a garage on the Barlow property in the town of Scriba. Brent was only 3 years old at the time of Heidi's abduction, and the expert was invited to verify whether the boy was telling the truth about the events of that day. The expert talked to the child, analyzed his drawings, and believed him. He advised looking for Heidi where the boy indicated. Interestingly, Brent knew Heidi before the abduction. His mother mentioned that during the Christmas holidays, after a visit to Richard Mitten, the boy's father, Brent mentioned seeing Heidi and that she gave money to Richard. When shown a photo of Heidi, the boy immediately recognized her and called her by name. Additionally, he accurately described her car. Brent added that 3 friends of his father were involved in Heidi's abduction, and the boy's mother remembered a conversation with her ex-husband on Easter Sunday in 1994, the day Heidi disappeared. She recalled how Richard suddenly claimed that 3 boys had kidnapped her. Who they were and whether they knew that Heidi was an informant is unknown. Investigators attempted to search the garage indicated by the boy, but couldn't conduct the search on either the garage or the adjacent area due to the lack of a warrant, and the homeowner did not allow the search. As evident, there are several theories about what might have happened to Heidi Allen besides the police's version implicating the Tibbetts brothers. It's possible that Stein, Breckenridge, and Bohr were the kidnappers, or perhaps friends of Brent Moore's father were involved. Since the girl was not found, there's also a more optimistic version suggesting that she entered a witness protection program. What if the police realized the danger they put Heidi in by making a teenager a confidential informant and then compromising her status? This could explain many unexplained aspects of the case. The appearance of her bracelet, the lack of signs of struggle in the store, the absence of evidence clearly pointing to any of the suspects. One might want to believe that she had to leave her family, but no one kidnapped her, and she is enjoying life somewhere in this world. Although one thing can be asserted almost certainly. When the sheriff's assistant dropped Heidi's informant card, he put an end to the life she had led until the age of 18. What truly happened on the morning of Sunday, April 3rd, 1994, remains unknown. It's possible that we may never find out. What we do know is that Gary maintained his innocence until his last breath. Gary Thibodeau passed away on August 12, 2018, at the age of 64, and his health did not allow him to live the additional 2 years to a potential conditional early release. Gary's departure means he will no longer have a chance to clear his name. Hope for another appeal in federal court died with him. He will remain a convicted inmate who abducted an 18-year-old girl and, according to many, is the second victim of this terrible and convoluted crime.